And we're live.
Mm.
Hello, world.
And the world says hello back. Is anybody on? Is anybody?
Let me.
Muir better be there. I'm gonna be mad.
Pop out chat. I don't think he is. I don't think there was any chat yet. I think it's just us.
Not that I saw.
Hey, David. David, I just had a double. I just made a double for the first time of an AeroPress, the Shara coffee. Fantastic, my friend. Fantastic. I mixed it with I took a double and mixed it with as much water as they say to make an Americano if you're making a single. And that was about perfect, So because when I tried to make a full Americano before with a single shot, it was like watery. Watery's all get at. It was more of a suggestion of coffee that made me want to get a real coffee. Welcome, the Ulukai. Ulukai. That sounds like something maybe mixing together a Lord of the Rings reference.
Yeah, it's an orc that plays a ukulele.
Oh, that's like from the Munchkin card game. Awesome. There's an orc bard in the Munchkin CCG that Kate likes to play. That keeps killing me, and it makes me very angry.
Nice. So the Munchkin CCG, you're still playing it, right?
Yeah, well, actually, we're doing a next Saturday. They're having a, I don't know, it's like an event. I wouldn't say it's a tournament, but it's like a launch event for the next boosters. And CloudCap is actually holding an event for me and Kate to go do, so it should be fun. Where we're going to buy 3 boosters and do a draft build and play the deck.
Oh, cool! So like that Magic sort of style format. Cool. I was wondering, where. So are you continuing to seek down? Have you guys gotten to where you've purchased any singles yet?
No, what I do is I'll just buy I've bought 6 or 7 booster packs, and I just give them all to Kate, and I went just build some stuff. I want to play them, and so she's put together a warrior deck that's pretty unbelievable. That I'm having difficulty with.
Yeah, the game's a lot of kind of bluffing, right? So
yeah, that's essentially what it is. And I think that's the reason Kate likes it so much, because I would say it's almost Cosmic Encounter, the card game, almost. But yeah, you just throw a card down, you put some money on it, and you either can run away from it, you can make them reveal it, you can counter it with a weapon you have, but you're Oh, that's 6 gold on that thing. I know Kate put a platinum dragon in that thing, and it does 8 damage. God, this is a tough choice.
Well, I officially had my last day of teaching for at least a year today, so.
Oh, that must be nice.
So did you haul everything out in that cardboard box that's the you've been laid off box?
I had a few boxes, much less than the teacher retired, because I am the anti-pack rat.
Yeah.
So it's this is all I really have in here. Shouldn't be surprising. I threw the rest away.
It's as empty as my soul.
No, that's what, when I was in college, people would come into my room. They're like, Jesus, it's like a gulag in here. How are you
nothing?
Yeah, because, my parents were... Yeah, my parents were 8 hours away, and I didn't have a car at the time, and they always made you switch dorms. So I'm like...
Did your parents move to Tennessee when you were in college?
I was done at community, literally within a 4-day time span. My brother had to be moved to Iowa City. I was moving to Ames, and my mom was joining Dad in Tennessee, all within 4 days.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of a life-shaking event there. She was on Valium for a while.
Yeah.
Little bit of an anxiety. No, I didn't have a car because literally the last trip with my vehicle at the time, I was pulling into our driveway. Last trip to get anything right, moving the next day. And a guy slams into the side of my car.
In a Tumwa. Just a parting gift.
Yeah, and the best part was he was apparently coming through the area, and those big trailer hitches you have on the front of a vehicle to tow it behind a camper.
Yeah.
That was still on it.
Oh, Did it shish kebab your car?
Oh yeah, it totaled it completely.
Like, what's this hitch next to me?
Yeah, at the end of it, I'm just like, you know what? I'm just not taking a vehicle to college.
Nah.
And I used the insurance money to partially pay for my first semester.
There you go.
I actually made out pretty good because my parents were like, their one way of helping was they're like, we'll cover your car insurance while you're in college. So I was like, dude, I just get like the money you're giving my brother for car insurance. They're like, yeah, but we'll make you apply it to your books. Like, all right, well, we can do that.
Cool. Word.
Yeah, it works for me. Actually, it kept me out of less, it made sure I stayed out of less trouble and all of that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. We got a comment there for you, Andy.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
Dean.
I saw
hey,
that.
Dean, welcome. Good to see you. Now that the sun's up later, I know that's probably still not. Maybe you got a little bit of twilight going on still there on the East Coast.
Oh, so Dean went to Heavy Con.
Yeah.
He did.
Ah, hey, Dean, how was that?
Oh, yeah, that's some solid games. Yeah, I like to refer to it as not so much a bug as it is a sickness. Because once you move down that rabbit hole, it is a dark.
Referring to the 18XX bug that Dean seems to have caught.
Yeah, dark, deep area of trains. And numbers, lots and lots of numbers.
Lots and lots of numbers.
For numbers.
Oh, did you guys see like this? My mind was slightly blown today. I don't really listen to them to anymore, but the Shut Up and Sit Down podcasts, they were like, they were reviewing Arkwright, and I'm like, oh, God, I don't even know if I wanted. They're gonna trash it, and they were both like, this was really, really good. I'm like, what bizarro world am I living in?
Well, they famously didn't like Scythe, and then they took then they like poked fun at terraforming Mars. So I would kind of be interested to see. I'm about to watch that arc right now. Oh, a PAX Ren. There was a PAX Ren tournament.
Yeah.
How does that work? You just stare at the cards and go, I don't know what's going on.
That's fine. Yeah, it was duels. Like Trent was really sad. He was going to play in that. He was going to play in that in the 6-player full campaign game of John Company.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear Trent about, because I wanted to hear that John Company. I wanted to hear if because it's weird. Every time I hear about John Company, it's like I hear people who are like, they only play like the early game, and they say, well, it's too die rolly. There's, you could get in a situation and they start complaining about being a little chaotic. But I never hear people talk about like the full game where you have the late companies, because I played one full game of that, and you really want to hang on to the company till that later phase so you can start running your own little mini company within the company. But I never hear people actually play that game enough to discuss that. So that's why I wanted Trent to go.
Yeah, I want to try it too. Maybe, David talked about wanting to play it this Sunday. Maybe we'll be like, David, we don't need the basic game. Full game.
Yeah, just go and dive. Just dive. I will not play. I mean, after doing that, I don't think I could do an early game again, or I could probably do a late game again. But man, running your own company is so crazy cool. It is, because you gotta like wheel and deal that thing for other people to invest in it, and it can get bought out from under you if you're not careful. It's pretty amazing.
And returning triumphantly, it's Trent.
Hi.
Good
Hey,
to see
Trent.
you, man.
You have time for a question?
Sure.
Okay, I was building a deck for Arkham Horror, and I'm building a new character, and I drew a weakness that says permanent. Does that mean it's out every time I play the game?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. I start the game with 2 fewer resources every time I play. Thanks, Trent.
Oh. Can you do like a character change in the middle of one of those campaigns?
Yeah, you can retire him, or you can just kill him. Like, he's got 4 permanent trauma. He has 5 health. Yeah, he's retiring. I'm going to get another character out.
But if you start another character, you don't have any baggage then, right?
Yeah, you don't have any of your upgrades either.
But the nice thing about a permanent weakness, though, is you don't have to worry about it ever popping up in your deck when you don't want it. You don't have to worry about that crap. You just blow through it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, until
It's
you
just already
gain
out.
by other means.
Well, before we get started here, we got some chatters that were at HeavyCon. So quickly, we were talking about the PAX Ren tournament champion is here. Ulukai is the PAX Ren tournament champion, and my sarcastic question to him was, in the championship game, were there any rules clarifications?
Did you still have to keep your eyes in the rule book?
Yeah. Everybody just has their own little copies of the rule book. That's how that would go. And we'll be talking about Phil Eklund later on, but the answer is yes, there was 2 of them. 2 in the championship game. But
all I want to know from Yuli here is how good did it feel to crush Joe Sturgis? That's all I want to know. Because I think he was involved in that tournament too.
Oh yeah.
From punching cardboard. I always want to know how bad he ate it.
God.
And it sounds like Dean had a highlight reel of 18xx games that he played and stuff. So HeavyCon looks like it was a huge success, and I'm glad that you guys all made it back okay. Everybody who's here, and it sounds like there was a lot of good gaming and a lot of good company. So anyway, everybody's missing you two guys though. Andy, Trent.
Well, I'm the life of any party, so I mean.
Oh God, can I be?
Oh, Infamous Traffic, Sidereal Confluence, and John Company. Yeah, sounds like they had a great time.
Can either of you guys pull off an Andy voice? I'm just like sick of him right now. I don't think I can take any real Andy. I think it's too much.
You know what's funny about my voice though? This is one of the reasons why I keep my video chat open. Is I went and got my son Wendy's for supper, and like once again they assumed I was a woman.
First of all, Andy, you made the mistake of going to Wendy's. That Wendy's gave me E. coli. Seriously, like that Wendy's gave me E. coli. I got E. coli from the Wendy's in Ames, Iowa. Yay! And they're sponsoring this episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. Go eat at Wendy's if you want 10 days of nothing but blue Gatorade.
Well, no, we had what was it, Cazador or something, in Ames. I ended up with food poisoning. Oh, that's misery.
Andy, I would say your voice sounds like a woman that's been smoking for her whole life.
Yeah, my voice is a little cracky. No, like legitimately, it was funny. I went through KFC once, and my daughter died laughing because like we pulled up to the window and this woman looks out at me and like turns back around and yells to the manager, "I told you it was a guy."
Nice.
Like I just stopped correcting people so I can see like the disturbed look on their face as they try to figure out how to save the situation.
You got into where like you're totally impervious to any like being actually offended. You just like watching people squirm out of it.
Yes, because I was such a macho male, alpha male type to begin with.
Oh yeah. I'm glad that you just like accept it's like whatever. I mean
there's bigger things to worry about. It's better than how my mom used to get my attention by throwing large objects at my head. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Andy, that's what made you who you are today, and we wouldn't have you any different.
Yep.
Aww.
I don't know. That and D&D, that probably did weird things. I don't know.
I don't know. It all shakes out in the end. It all shakes out in the wash.
It's probably like some weird part of my brain that's blocking out in college when we used to play the www.willthisbeanactualwebsite.com game.
Well, you could have made probably like millions of dollars with the right strikes in that game.
No, there's things that I need to like
emoji domains and
yeah. I was just like, www. Oh God, I need to forget what I just seen.
That one's a little bit too obvious, It's not going to pull a meat spin on anyone. Do not go to that website. It was a dumb college thing. Don't do that one. Don't do the old 2 girls either. The
furniture porn was pretty cool.
I'm looking at now.
Although, like, it was just like a picture with a chair on a couch.
Oh my God! All right, well, with that. Yes, that coming to an end here with our little intro. Sorry, guys. Let's get her started.
This is why my students used to like me. They're like, Mr. Dennison, you give us all this extra science that we may never have wanted to hear.
I'm just going to write down a bunch of statements where the whole purpose of me saying them will to see how Andy reacts, because I feel like he's going to have a reaction to any of them. It's just how bizarre is it going to get? It's just out there in left field. So we'll save that for a later episode. In Tuesdays with Andy. All right, 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games. I'm the host of The Good, the Bored, the Ugly, Joe Sallin. I'm joined tonight by all 3 of my beautiful co-hosts. And I can see all of your lovely smiling faces there. First of all, we have Andrew Dennison. How are you tonight, Andy?
Not too bad. Voice is a little scratchy, but we're getting through.
I don't remember if I said my name. I'm Joe Sallin if I didn't say it. Anyway, our next co-host out on the West Coast. He's in a spare bedroom, as I can see, and he is just ready to go. It was his idea, our episode tonight, and yes, and unfortunately, we'll be having worse luck in his future games of L5R. That's TC, of course.
Hey, good to see you, Joe. Guys, I don't feel quite as alone now.
No, you will feel back to just as alone pretty soon. Okay, your job here, TC, is just to be marginalized.
No, that's cool. I know. At least I know my role.
Yeah, you know it's coming. Okay, I just tell you so that you can kind of prep for it, man. It doesn't hurt so bad if you can see it coming, right? The thing is, though, TC, you did just get nerfed. Your Scorpion clan just got nerfed in L5R, and that's what I was referring to. And you were telling me like you had this huge combo of cards, and then it comes out that's like the first thing on the ban list. So it
was Scorpion. Who else? There's another one that got hit pretty hard, Trent. It was Scorpion and I think maybe Dragon.
Dragon got Muramoto's Fury banned.
Yeah, so I had like there's like a certain card combo you can't do anymore, and it was like my linchpin for my Scorpion deck. So now I gotta reevaluate life and look at the deck.
Well, if TC isn't on next week, we'll know that this was just one. It was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Or if you see like this big pile of L5R cards in the back and me in the match going, I'm done.
Well, he's not the only L5R player. We've also got Trent Ham, who plays himself some L5R. Trent, does your strategy maintain? Is it able to be conserved after the huge banning party that they had there?
Yeah, I played Crane, and Crane got completely untouched, so I'm fine.
Yeah. And Lion.
Do LCGs usually get banned this quickly, or are they taking a more proactive approach due to some other missteps maybe in the past?
I don't know. I think they're overzealous.
You think they banned a little too much?
Yeah, I think they're overzealous with the bannings. That's my opinion.
Did we ever see any banning? I used to play the Game of Thrones card game. Was there ever any banning?
After you kind of stopped playing, there was several.
There was? Okay.
Yeah.
But
there was an absolutely broken Lannister deck about 3 months after you stopped playing. I mean, busted.
Too good. Okay, and then they ended up having to ban that. But it wasn't like... I played that game for like a good year plus. Like I don't say it was like a year and several months, like a year and a half. Never any banning.
18 honor on turn 2.
Whoa, it's ridiculous. It sounds like something where there was just a number that got. That sounds like a decimal point there, Trent. It should be 1.8 honor.
No, it was bad. It was real bad, and they had to do some banning because there was a problem.
They should like ban any card like after the character was killed in the show. Can't use them anymore. They're dead.
Yep. You can no longer. You have to actually physically destroy that copy of the card now.
Can't use it.
Permadeath. Yeah. So we talk about board games on The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, and tonight we have the first and what I'm hoping to be something that we come to revisit here as our topic, and tonight will be Designer Showcase Episode 1. We've all picked a designer, each of us for differing reasons, it seems. I think TC, who suggested this topic, wanted it to be kind of a nice little positive outing, and I think it became twisted and, like, essentially the Urukai to TC's elves in the minds of other hosts on this podcast. So we'll see how whether or not we're plumbing the dark depths of the gaming psyche as we each discuss a game designer and just give a little overview and talk about their accomplishments, what to look for from them. Just a little designer spotlight, something where we're each going to pick one, so it's not going to be a ton of time. But anyway, look forward to that as our topic of this episode. Before we get there, we're going to all review games. And on our way out the door, should you make it to that point in the episode, which I certainly hope you do, but I totally understand if you don't get there. We get some pretty long episodes and the good, the word, and the ugly. But and on our way out the door, we always hype games. So anyway, look forward to that. And also look forward to this upcoming advertisement for Game Surplus. Don't forget that Game Surplus sponsors the good, the bored, and the ugly. And they're really great. Carmen's a really great guy, really great game store. And he sponsors a lot of other really great content in board gaming, especially like podcasts, low player count, heavy cardboard. And, he's going to be putting up yours truly. And you'll hear about that more in the hype section for the WBC 2018. So anybody out there who makes it to WBC, I think you might actually have to avoid me at that convention for the first time in your experience. So we'll talk about that more later. First, let's get into the reviews. And I think we want to start with Andy doing a first. So you've done a first impressions, and now we're going to kind of come back to revisit. And I'm wondering if Andy's going to have his mind made up after all this waiting. Gosh, go Andy.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of revisit Wildcatters in that we got a chance to play that a couple more times, and I don't know, I really, really like it. It's an interesting game in that it's basically area control. You have to deliver oil to these various regions. So the scoring mechanism's pretty easy, and the fact it's just area control. I have these many barrels here. I get this many points for having the most, second most, third most, so on. The interesting part comes in the logistical aspects of how you get to the oil of where you want to go. I liked it a lot more on my second and third plays of it. I still feel like I have a lot to learn in the game as far as like the best way to get the oil where you want it to be. That's the hard part, and how you're going to like piggyback off other people's or dominate certain regions. And to me, that there's still a lot of opaque decisions there. Like there's some things I've explored and strategy I've tried, but I don't know if there's any one particular way to really do super well. I think this, unlike many games, you're going to have to do a lot of reaction to what other people are doing. And that makes it more interesting to me. There's definitely, even for an area control game, there's a lot of interaction of figuring out what they're doing, where are they developing, trying to get somebody else to spend the most workers to drill for the oil so you don't have to. And I just find that interesting. So I would still highly recommend this game to anyone who wants a very interactive sort of area control Euro that has a different take on it. I think it does smooth out quite a bit in the second and third play. I think you can get it could be prone to a little bit of AP for some people at the beginning as you kind of try to work out what all's going on. But it's a highly interactive game. There's still lots of logistical options and how you want to move stuff around. And like I said, I want to keep playing it because I keep thinking about it, and I definitely don't feel like, even after 3-ish plays, that I'm even beginning to figure out what the master, or if there's a master strategy, or even necessarily what's the best moves or anything like that. There's still a lot to explore here, and that makes it really interesting to me. So that's Wildcatters. Keep checking it out. It's really, really good. I'm happy to have it, and I want to keep playing it.
Cool. Yeah, I was a part of this game as well, and what's really interesting to me is I kind of went in with an idea of what I wanted to do, and I felt like, well, this is what you need to do, and the game still sort of offered me a lot of new challenges that were different than previous games because when players make a decision, it kind of seems to open up a door for everybody else to really benefit from it. And so you kind of have to be careful what enterprises you undertake, right, Andy? Especially, It was me, Andy, and Trent all in this game together with another guy who actually it was Josh who used to edit this podcast, and he was, it's not really his wheelhouse, but he ended up doing really well. What was hilarious though is I think Trent took every opportunity he could to like, oh, you just opened a refinery? Hey guys, you know where you should send all your oil? To Andy, who has 3 shares in his possession.
Yeah, I took a lot of loans out that game, which was
How'd
fun.
that work out for you, Andy?
Oh, not well, but I was trying something new, so I'm like, we'll see if this works. Oh, that didn't work. Okay. But I don't know. There's still a lot of ways you can go about it. What I thought was particularly interesting this game, the game we played, I guess I forgot to mention, is nobody really wanted to be the person who had to spend the 8 workers to drill for oil. So it was like 3 rounds and nobody had delivered a dang barrel anywhere because nobody would like pop the area to actually start moving oil around.
Yep. A long time. Yeah. So, it took a long time before any of those other areas opened up. And I need to keep playing it too, Andy. One thing that I really appreciate about Wildcatters is that you know, there are elements to the game that I've called fiddly in the past, and I still feel that they're a little bit fiddly, but they have a function, and that's it. Like when you're looking from across the board, like it is very, very easy to see all of the information, and I think part of that is because of how many pieces are in this game. There's probably over 1,000 things on that component list. I mean, there's a couple of things that I would have changed, like the fact that all the money in the game, all the stocks, you know, which is like kind of just your personal currency, is printed on like cards. I mean, the cards are okay, but you know, I feel like it could have been maybe different sizes of like a token, so that way you could just do more like sort of condensing and stuff. It's just, and I know that they kind of added that from Capstone, but it's kind of a half-hearted attempt. So I've talked just a little bit about some of the things that are still sort of clunky. But for the most part, the way that board works, where you can see all the little barrels of oil, and be able to really like, just the rules melt away. I think you said that, Trent, when we were playing, that the rules really start to melt away.
They sure do.
Yep, it looks way more intimidating on the table than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
The rules are pretty easy. Like I think, was it because I taught it to Josh and it maybe took me 10 minutes or something? It's like it wasn't that hard of a teach.
Yeah, I mean when it comes down to it, you've still got that area control. Like if you start calculating your points too early, just don't even start thinking about how many points you're going to be getting for the area control aspect of the game until like the second to last round. Because if you start counting on those points later, you're just going to end up losing them. Seriously, other people are going to jump in front of you. I mean, it's one of those kind of push and shove games. And here's the thing. I think maybe I would like a little bit more restrictions on where you can send like your like shipping, the ships. Like it just seems so wide open that you can just kind of ship to wherever as long as you have a boat there. I mean, it just seems like it keeps the door open to every possibility. And sometimes I almost want there to be a little bit more of a direction or maybe a limitation. I don't know. Like I feel like I'm kind of making pokes at the game, but I really on the whole am really enjoying exploring it with Andy. So I mean.
Yeah, what's really fun to do in Wildcatters is to use somebody's ship they're counting on to move their own oil next round. Take their ship and use it to deliver yours somewhere. So that whole plan goes down the toilet.
Yes. But you have to pay them shares to do that. So
but it was still fun to do.
Like leveraging those shares is huge, man.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, and if you run out, it's bad. Like
Andy knows this first.
Oh God, I think I had to repay 3 loans in that game. It was not
at
pretty.
Least, dude. You paid back a loan before it was even round 5. I'm pretty sure you took out at least 2 more. I'm thinking it was 3 because I think we made you take out loans pretty much once a round almost.
Oh yeah, it was bad.
So,
but good fun.
I think he took 1 out and then he was able to pay it back around 5, and then he took out 2 more.
Yeah. No, I had to pay 225s. Yeah.
Yep.
It's all good.
Yeah.
I was laughing hysterically. I'm as good at being screwed with as I am at screwing with other people. So.
Yeah. it really did start to melt away, and it was a cool core game underneath it all. Just, don't get intimidated by this game. It's really not as heavy as it looks.
No, I would say it's a solid medium heavy. It's got nothing on, say, like an Arkwright or something. It's definitely more approachable than that.
Yeah, it almost feels to me like, I know it's not designed by him, but it feels like, Thomas Spitzer designed the Cole trilogy, and it feels like for some reason it would belong in there. I know that it's like just the low-hanging fruit there is that it's about fossil fuels, but it feels like it has, like a few limitations as to where you can work and stuff, but it does feel like almost like the next, after Coal and Colony, when you've got all these coal companies and how they're consolidating, now it's like, okay, now the world is your oyster, and the product is no longer coal, it's oil. So it feels almost like it would belong in that library together with the Coal trilogy, referring to Haspel Connect, the Ruhr or Ruhrschifffahrt if you played the original version, and then the third game in that was Coal and Colony. The Coal trilogy, as it's called, by Thomas Spitzer. So anyway, it's just a really cool game, and yeah, let's go ahead now and move into now we'll go back to a first impression, and this is going to be Trent dancing around Andy's favorite game.
Yeah, I played Three Kingdoms Redux for the first time over the past weekend. And I believe that although I missed that episode, that was in fact Andy's favorite game of all time, if I can remember right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It dances around my number one here and there.
Okay. So Three Kingdoms Redux is a game published currently by Capstone Games. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the designers' names, as I often don't. Basically, it tells the story of the Three Kingdoms period in ancient China, where basically three factions essentially had divvied up the ancient Chinese Han Dynasty. And the emperor was kind of their plaything amongst them. There was still an emperor, but he was kind of emperor in name only, and he was kind of their plaything. So you play one of those three factions, and what this is basically just a worker placement game, except with the twist that all of your workers have individual powers. And the way that does that is every worker in the game has a unique token, and that token's associated with a card that sits in front of you. The token itself indicates a couple different numbers on the card that indicate its stats, and also the card itself indicates some sort of special ability for it. So during the game, you have these workers that are represented by cards, and the ones you get are different each game. You have this thick deck of cards that's just unique for you, for your faction. And at the start of the game, you get to choose a couple out of it. Like you draw 6 and choose 2 or 3, depending on which faction you are. And then throughout the game, you draw 6 and choose a couple, or the number depends on which faction you are. But you eventually wind up with roughly 8 generals, is what they're called, and they're workers that you get to place on the board. The interesting part about this is that it isn't like a normal worker placement game where if you put a dude on it, you just get the spot. They're effectively auctioned. So when you put a guy on a spot, that spot indicates which of the 3 stats matters for it. And then other players can put their workers on that spot too. And at the end of the round, when everybody's placed all their workers, you evaluate any spots where multiple players have a guy, and then a person with the best number in that relevant category takes the spot. That's just, the other workers just go off the board and they don't do anything. The only impact they have is they probably help you get a better slot for a worker placement next round. You'll get to go earlier in the round. So what are you actually placing workers for? Mostly, you seem to be placing workers to build up an army, and you use those army. So there's like this shared area of about 12 worker placement spots, and you're using those amongst the 3 players to build up an army. But then there's also a couple of spots, one between each of the 3 players. So there's like one between you, a player to your left, and one between you and the player to your right. And those spots are battle zones. And essentially, the player who wins those using the army stuff that they've collected in the middle of the board, that's where you're going to end up getting a lot of your points from, as ended up winning battles. The thing I will say about this game is it's pretty asymmetric. It felt like the factions were kind of doing different things. It's not as wildly asymmetric as like Sidereal Confluence, but it did feel like there were very different things going on. Second thing is, it felt point salady to me. Very point salady. Like, you have ways of getting points here, and ways of getting points there, and ways of getting points there, and ways of getting points there. and here and there and there and there, and they all added up at the end of the game. And when you're first playing this game, for a worker placement game, there really is a lot to take in. And I really didn't even grasp some of the ways in which you could get points in the middle of the game. So, I mean, I didn't do well. I gotta say, this is one of those games where the first time you play it, you need to just like, this is a learning experience, period.
Yeah.
Because, like, having a grasp on how exactly all the ways you score points is not clear. This is like, I felt like at the end, like, it was a mix of a really deep worker placement game and a Feld game. Because it felt very point salady. It really did. I enjoyed it. I don't mind the point salidiness of Feld's. I want to play it again. I have some concept of what's going on and how you're supposed to score points. I didn't do all that bad. I was only about 8 points back of the other two players who were both experienced. So I was like reasonably happy with that. But when it came to final scoring, I actually thought I was like really close. And then there was a bunch of things scored that was like I had no grasp on. And it's just like, okay, there goes.
It's kind of like Agricola because it's like, oh, you get points for this. You need to have this. You need to have this.
Yes.
Or Dungeon Lords, where it has one of those where there's specific end game goals that are always the same, and your first game, it's going to be tough to get all that and learn to play the game.
Yes, that's a lot going on. So to me, it's one I want to play again. I was very intrigued to how I felt like the factions were different. I felt like each faction would definitely be replayable because you're not always going to get the same emperors. I looked through my stack of or not emperors, generals. I looked through my stack of generals, and there are like 20 of them or something, and looked through each of the cards. And it seemed to me like there were some that were really strong and some that were not so strong. And then there were definitely ones that synergized with each other. Like, two would be great to have. Two would be great to have as a set. I was looking through them and kind of sorting them out like that. So it made me want to play my own faction again, let alone the other two. So that bodes well for replayability for me. It makes me think this game has legs. I enjoyed it. It's, like I said, it's about a 2.5 hour long worker placement. And because all the spots are auctioned, it's not as cut and dried first person to the spot takes it. Like some worker placement. That makes it feel like it's not. It makes it feel like it's not as tight, but it actually is pretty tight. Because when you want a spot, someone else probably also wants that spot.
Yeah.
And you're both going to be, you have to decide just, I'm going to cut my losses here and go elsewhere, or I'm going to go all in and just hope that it works. Yeah, and
you
that's
guys
always...
Quickly was what I thought. Like, I was surprised. Like, we were learning a game down the other table for the first time, but it was a much shorter game. And I was surprised. You guys were approaching the end of your game of Three Kingdoms Redux.
The other two players were familiar, Andy and another guy named David. And I had read the rules a couple times, so I had some idea of what was going on. So it wasn't like we were like out in the middle of nowhere, 3 players trying to run out of a rule book, which would have been disastrous.
Yeah.
And I also got the teach pretty down for this game, so it doesn't take me too long.
Yeah, and so I mean, I felt like it moved right along. I never felt like there was a lot of downtime or boredom in it. It just kept bumping right along. I think the fact is you're placing so many workers each round, and there's a lot of rounds, means that it's one of those games where you end up taking a lot of moves during the game, and those each individually add up a little bit to something big. It's one of those types of games. It's not like you're making 10 moves and that's it. You're probably making like 80 worker placements throughout the course of the game or something like that.
Yeah, per player, probably.
Yeah, something like that. So it builds, you're making little steps all the time, little exchanges and building up and building up and building up. That's the kind of game this is. And I really liked it. I am a fan of it. I look forward to replaying it again. I'd like to play it a couple times, and I know some people that I know outside of our typical Ames group that would love this a lot for the theme and would be willing to tackle the relative heaviness of it. Because I think it's honestly, if you played a worker placement game and you get through your first game of this one's not bad in terms of weight. It really isn't.
Especially if you've played Lancaster, which has that sort of like every spot's an auction sort of idea. Not exactly the same in Lancaster. Here you've got it takes that sort of idea, that kernel of an idea, and develops it much further. By having there being different values for each piece and special abilities to tie in with that as well. But yeah,
I don't know if that'll be the issue. I think the major issue for approachability of Three Kingdoms is no matter how much you explain that end game scoring, you've got to see it in action once to figure it out.
Like I said, I thought I was in pretty good shape for the endgame scoring, but I had misinterpreted a couple things and completely missed a couple others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
I would say if I was
like,
teaching it, I'd just be like, hey, everything that you can do in this game pretty much at the end of the game is going to be worth like some sort of majority scoring. So whoever has the most this wins.
But it took me also a lot to realize that there's things that are definitely more valuable than others.
Yes.
Like, for example, there's points for upgrading your infrastructure, your granaries, and your marketplaces. And the early games, people worried about that a lot because you kind of need it for army upkeep anyway. And it's really not worth that many points at the end of the game compared to, say, the Emperor track or the Borders and Military track and things like that.
I felt like the only time you want to upgrade it is maybe a little bit early and then not worry about it. The only reason you do it a little bit early is because you might not have a good economy going yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you could end up in a real big pinch with your resources if you don't have at least a little bit. But after that, I saw no point.
No,
it didn't seem like it was worth very many points. So
no, at that point, yeah, I usually only upgrade it if I see like by doing an upgrade, it gets me the first place in the category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just that sort of like you get, especially if you can take a point from the person who you think is your biggest competition, right? And I think Trent, did you mention? What did you think of the alliance token?
Okay, so what that does is it kind of is a little bit of a reward for the player who got kind of boned the last round, more or less, is the way it works.
Yeah,
I mean, that's honestly what it is.
But so they sort of talk about it together with the person who's second to last because they're the ones that benefit from it.
Yeah, it's basically saying whoever had the really sweet last round is kind of boned a little bit this round and probably gets the place they want taken away from them.
Yeah.
It's basically all the tokens. I thought that was interesting. I liked it. I felt like it was balancing. It kept it from one guy just repeatedly getting hammered or locked out of stuff a little bit.
Gives you a little bit of sharps.
Yeah, if you get hammered in a round, and it happened to me real bad one round.
Yeah, it did to me too. Yeah. There was like one time, like I only had one.
Yeah, I had one as well,
or something.
Yeah, and so that getting that token was really helpful because I was able to lock down a spot I wanted. So, I was really impressed with the game. I think it was really good. Okay, so. The question is, have we shown Capstone enough love tonight so far?
No, my question is, did you want to play Three Kingdoms after you watched Westworld?
Well, I've watched all of Westworld. That's and
spoiler maybe. I feel like there's a spoiler even by suggesting that, TC.
Because I know after watching all this, I was like, "Ooh, I want to play Three Kingdoms redo because I want to go to that time period." Ooh, it's cool.
Yeah, spoilers. That's the reason I was hesitant to say much, but TC just goes for it. So
if you watch the trailers, you know what's going to happen.
Sure, yeah. I think I've heard tell of it. Yes, through the grapevine. It sounds like I think they could take the Three Kingdoms. Obviously, like making it play for 3 people and stuff. I feel like there's maybe not quite as in-depth explorations that could be easily applied to other situations, but it is definitely like a game system that I enjoy so much. I want to see those things, even though I know that they're not just going to like prop up out of the ground. So, well, that was Three Kingdoms Redux from Trent and his first play of it. And let's now hear from TC, who's been raring to tell us all about his first time in the. Have you played this one before? The GMT game that's nothing like any other GMT games aside from that Lemmings, that weirdo Lemmings thing that they made. They've Trent's talked about this one before, but I'll let TC tell you exactly what it is. I'm not gonna spoil it for you.
You can spoil away. I got my hands on a copy of Welcome to Centerville, Chad Jensen's newest design, which he may be coming up later on in this episode. What is Welcome to Centerville? Welcome to Centerville is a dice chucking game of all things. It plays a lot like Yahtzee or what's that?
King of Tokyo.
King of Tokyo. It's like King of something, yeah. Where you roll the dice, you keep what you want, you roll, keep what you want, and you roll 3 times. And so you're like, wow, I don't GMT game that does something like this. I don't know, but I'm a huge Chad Jensen fan. I'm like, I've got to check this out. It looks like it uses the same theme as Urban Sprawl, so I'm all in. And what ended up happening, well, I could tell you how the game plays, but honestly, what's really interesting about this one is it's really easy to describe what you do. I mean, there's a play mat, and it describes in detail everything you can do. All the rules are on this one sheet. It's like one of the best GMT player aids, just period player aids I've ever seen. So, okay, so we played it at 2 players, and Chris was like, boring. I'm like, no, let's crank it up, because the back of the box it says, recommended at 4. So the next time we play it at 4, and oh my goodness, did this game take off. Now, the crazy thing about this one is, while I can explain to you what everything does and what you can spend dice on, you will not grok this thing till you see it score at least 1 round. And what's really interesting is you can just roll the dice once, and you have so many options of what to spend them on without even re-rolling. It's insane. Like, oh, I could do this, I could do that, I could rip the tree track, I could build the center of the city. But so a big chunk of this game is figuring out how scoring works and what you need to go for. And that takes a while. I've played it 4 or 5 times now, and I'm just now getting a grasp on what you need to go for first, what you need to look for, and what you need to stop other people from doing. Now, there's been a few complaints about the game, but what's really interesting about that is the complaints about this game seem to apply to all of Chad's games, so I will get into those in detail when we discuss.
This sounds very different from his other games. Could you, what kind of complaints do you mean?
Okay, let's see here. I have a list. Would you like to see them? We can talk about it now if you would like.
Oh, you're going to get to it later on in the episode. I'm sorry. Yes. I didn't mean to do that. Okay. We should have done yours last, dude. I did not even realize.
Transition there, Joe. And
you should just skip my review, and then we could just jump right into the topic. I didn't realize that Chad Jensen designed this game. This is just like a bizarro, weird, not like any of his other games game. But I guess what are his other games like? That's for the topic.
That will be the topic. But what I can say for Welcome to Centerville is a very unusual GMT game. It's one that my group is enjoying a lot, and I think this type of game is as far as complex as you can push a die roll keeping mechanism as you can get, because wow, there's a lot you can do in this game. My biggest complaints against it is it really doesn't feel like you're building a city if you really think about what you're doing. Because you're just putting cubes on, and like there's suburbia and there's a tree track. You're like, this isn't really quite building a city, but it's cool, so who cares? And there's something else. Oh, and the board is like a little too tiny. It was weird. It's like this smaller size board, and so like which it was just a little bit bigger, so I could put all this stuff I need to on the board. But other than that, it's been going well. 4 or 5 plays into it, I'm really enjoying it, and we will discuss more in general about the complaints that people level against this game, because like I said, it was surprising that everything I read in the comments, which is kind of funny because people seem to write bad comments when they've only played the game once. And it was a whole lot of experience to be writing bad comments, but they seem to apply to most of Chad's designs, and it's something I wanted to talk more in general when we get into our topic.
Huh. Well, TC, if I was a better host, or in this case, had I known, I think I would have still done this better. But yeah, I did not know. I'm going to try to talk about mine because I thought mine might segue into
I've actually played this, so I was going to say something.
Sorry, Trent. Yeah, absolutely, dude.
Okay, I have played this. It is absolutely, undoubtedly the pinnacle of what I think could be done with the Yahtzee mechanic. It is like the best. I don't know how you do better than this.
Yeah,
with the Yahtzee mechanic, it's really good. It's like you generally think about like games of the Yahtzee mechanic where your choice is centered on like what dice do I keep and what obvious effect they're gonna have. Take away the effect being obvious and make it like more dominant species-ish, where there's a lot of like, I mean, the game's nowhere near as complex as Dominant Species, but my point is like there's a lot of moving parts in terms of deciding what you're going to do with the dice. It's not obvious what the best thing you're going to want out of your dice is. It really isn't obvious. That's what's fun about it. So you're rolling these dice and you're thinking, okay, this set is pretty good. If I re-roll, I might be able to get something slightly better, but it would be like a completely different turn. I'd be doing completely, totally different things and interacting on a completely different part of the map type things. I was really impressed with that. I was thoroughly impressed with this game. It's really good. I'm gonna just stop there and say it definitely gets my thumbs up. I've not played it 4 or 5 times yet. I've only played it a couple times, but it's really good.
Well, what surprised me, Trent, about it was how more vicious the game got with the more players that got in on it. So when you play with 4, it is a bloodbath, and they try to limit it with the favor tokens because there's like 10 in the whole game, and once you use them, they're gone. But they are huge in how you spend those, and just the decision to like, dude, I want to get up in that status track, but if I do, I'm gonna knock Trent down to 2nd place. He's gonna get a dang favor token, and he's gonna be leveraging that against me in some horrific way. Yeah, I was surprised the meanness that came in this game, but it didn't show till we got to like 4 players. The 2-player has this bot, which is boring. It really is. It's like it's functional, it works, but yeah, just don't even bother with that. Just play the 3 or 4.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like ideal player counts are something that like is very rarely conveyed on the back of a box. I'm glad that GMT is taking a step further than just, place 2 to 5.
Yeah, it says on the back of the box, best at 4. It's right there. I'm like, hey, honey, I think we found the problem. It says best at 4.
Board Game Geek does that for you, but not everybody that plays games is onto that. And then you end up sometimes hearing from somebody about how much they hated a game, and they hated that game because it was at the wrong player count. I mean, like it was, you play a 2-player area control game. That's not going to be very fun. Sorry.
Well, and that's very notorious. For example, in Age of Steam, there's a lot of people because the base map that is included, that's a 4 and 5 player map. If you play it at less than that, you're like, this is no fun.
Yeah. Well, they have just so many maps, so yeah.
Now, but I mean, if you just if you were a newbie at the time and you just bought a base game, a lot of people tried playing Age of Steam initially at 2 or 3, and they're like, this is no good.
Doesn't it just break your heart, though, when you've got a game that you really want to play and you just can't get the right player count for it? I mean, it is... At least you know what the right player count is, because sometimes you end up in that TC and Carissa situation where it's like, hey, this game sucks.
Yeah. Carissa was not impressed that first time, but when we played it later, she was, and her face lit up. Then she started doing mean things. I'm like, yeah, we're on.
Yeah, we had that trouble for what was the curse? Dungeon Lords. Yeah, that was the curse of the game night for like a freaking year.
You have to have 4, and if you don't have 4, like you have to explain a whole nother way that like a bot works, and it's made so that players are supposed to have like limited control over what it can do, and so it's like, hey, after I've just explained to you one of probably the most in-depth teaches I've ever had to do and that you've ever had to sit through. Let me now explain how this bot works, because that's important to you knowing how to play the game, because you have to like manipulate him as well. So awful to have to do that. But ideal player counts, though, definitely something that I'm glad that they're conveying. But it can also lead to just like, what happens if you try to play 3 Kingdoms Redux with less than 3?
You don't play it.
Yeah, you don't. You
just put it up and do something else.
At least you aren't going to hate the game because of that. You're just going to sit there and be like, I never have 3. So, and the game that I'm going to review, to transition here from talking about player counts, like it's an area control game and it has rules for 2 players. And the rules for 2 players involve you just like having a 12-sided die, rolling that die, and then basically a non-player character inhabits regions and fights at absolutely random, just wherever the dice sends them. And, I could see that being maybe okay, the way that the scape, the way the whole board is going to change. But it just, no, I don't think that I would ever want to play an area control game with 2. I just don't think it seems like a great idea. So, and the area control game I'm talking about is MOA by Martin Wallace, some designer I thought I might hear more about from Trent during our topic. So that was why I saved mine to the end, but I didn't realize that TC had also planned his transition and review and topic out. So well done, TC. I wish I had known.
Up, yeah. I mean, hey.
Well, yeah, we'll stick with this now that we have to. And that's game MOA is a 45 to 60 minute game for 2 to 5 players. and it is you take the role of the indigenous tribes of New Zealand that are represented by the endemic birds, largely which are composed of like the kiwi, the kakapo, the moa, which is actually extinct. But these are like the sort of flightless birds that were able to thrive in New Zealand due to its relative isolation until mammals came to the island, and lo and behold, the invaders that are going to invade the island are actually mammals. So you kind of play as the birds, anthropomorphic endemic birds, and then the mammals are going to be invading. But what's interesting about this game is it's an area control game, and the mammals are not just the bad guys. They're invading your island, but you can fight them off, and that's going to get you points, maybe like kind of like renown. You can also sell out to these invaders. Now, selling out to the invaders lets you make an area very difficult for other players to place in. And it also gains you certain amounts of points because it sort of keeps those invaders from going and attacking the island. So these invaders that are coming out, so long as the game triggers, so long as they are triggered by the sort of deck of AI, they're going to be worth points. Somebody's going to be getting them, and they're going to kick people out of the territories they're in. So they can invade a territory and just totally kick you out. But the whole point of this is to get the most pieces in a territory because everything is worth a certain amount of points after scoring. You have 2 rounds to the game. 2 rounds. So like the first round, the first phase, I guess they call it, first half of the game when you are like mainly going to be placing out large amounts of birds. The way the game is played is actually you get 9 cards to start the game, and you have 7 rounds in which you're going to be utilizing these 9 cards to take actions, which are generally going to be composed of you placing birds out of the map. Also, you can place special birds that are called leaders and get these extra bonuses. You can buy tiles that allow you to do things like draw extra cards or filter through your cards that you don't like and get better ones, or let you place down and actually move your birds. Moving your birds from one territory to another is extremely difficult in this game. It's like you're really settling the land almost, and the only way that you can move is by special abilities. So you're going to be getting these 9 cards, seeing what stuff is at your disposal, and then playing out with your other players, but you're not able to impact the entire map. It's kind of randomly determined by this deck that also randomly assigns like an AI for the mammals for what builds up and when they attack. And so anyway, at the end of a certain amount of rounds, you're going to evaluate who gets the most points, and the way that ties work, or the way that area control works in this game, is pretty straightforward. Anyway, the second half of the game is what's strange, and what really kind of maybe rubs me the wrong way for the rest of this game, and that's that you have like no control over what cards you get dealt in the second half of the game. And most players ended up in situations where they had like most of their birds out on the table, and they didn't have the ability to really get them back. They couldn't do much. So the end of the game for many players was just like saying like I pass, hoping that the right combination of things will come up later on. If you don't have the ability to purchase extra tiles, then you don't really have much you can do to impact your hand. And if you don't have cards that give you symbols that you can utilize towards actions that are going to benefit you, you just sit there like passing and not able to do stuff. So that, together with the fact that you're only able to impact in certain territories every round, means that there's a lot of stuff that's out of your control in this game. Now, it's a short game, and it's one that I really enjoy for the spirit like that it's trying to come across here. And I think that I'm almost too lenient in my opinion of this game, because I really like the idea of playing as these like endemic birds. I think it's very clever that you play as the birds against the invaders, which are represented by mammals. I think it has a connection to present day New Zealand, which is still fighting battles to try to keep the mammal population at bay, to allow these unique birds that live nowhere else in the world to continue to be able to exist. I've seen like news episodes where they have 5- and 6-year-old kids that are being taught to like trap animals. It's just ridiculous. That they hate these, like marmots and stuff. But anyway, overall, I really personally feel a connection to this game. I'm not saying that I recommend it to everybody. I feel a connection to this game because I think it is interesting in its topic. It's dealing with with a sort of you're like getting colonized, but you can also sort of interact with the colonizer. But the colonizer, if it comes down to it, will kick you out. unless you can defend yourself. So, I mean, the fact that it does this and lays it on top of an interesting, beautiful-looking game, like it looks like Small World, and I would much rather play this to Small World. But really, like, when I compare it to other area control games, the only reason I would see myself reaching for this one instead of other games is because of how short this one plays. Like, there's a lot out of your control, but it feels kind of like you're riding that mechanical bull, and it can be okay for the fact that it's a shorter game. Anyway, that's my take on MOA. So I can't just recommend it wholeheartedly, but I can say that I personally have developed a connection to it, and maybe that would be the case for you if anything that I've said so far sounds interesting. So that's my take on MOA. Trent got to play this one. What do you think, Trent?
I liked it. I think it would definitely reward some replay. I don't know. I didn't particularly love it. It didn't stand out to me as doing anything particularly interesting. It just what it did. It did well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I would definitely be happy to replay it. I don't know that it's what I will ever add to my collection. And we're gonna get into this again in a little bit. I think, in general, regarding this designer.
Okay. Well, we could kick right into it if you want, because that was how I had this set up, and then we'll do it like in drafting style, you know, where it's like snake draft, where we go through and we'll do Martin Wallace first because that was the last review, and then we'll move into Chad Jensen for TC, and then we'll figure out the rest of our stuff. So, Trent, you want to take the honors of going first here?
I'd rather not, actually.
Whoa. Well, Trent, I'm passing the mic to you right now. So,
and he drops
ladies and gentlemen, Trent Ham. You go ahead and you can introduce somebody else then.
All right, I guess I can start. I guess the general.
You don't have to start, dude. Just tell me who you want to start then.
You.
Oh, whoa. Okay, I'm talking about Eric Lang. I'm talking about Eric Lang. When we wanted to showcase designers, I was like, you know, here's a designer that like is just all the buzz right now, and I wanted to kind of look at like what is his origin story, and it's actually kind of interesting. And what is he known for? And it connects to something that I was very intrigued by that I saw on Board Game Geek recently. So Eric Lang has designed his first entry in BGG is that he helped with a game that was originally designed by Reiner Knizia, Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation, which we did an episode of the Longview TC. Mm-hmm. And Eric Lang was actually involved in the design of the sort of like variant plays to Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation, where he designed extra characters to give more legs to the overall game of Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation, which is what makes it kind of feel having that extra replayability is super, super interesting and very intriguing. Something that Reiner Knizia usually doesn't do. I think he wants you to be able to count on everything that's going to be in the game, whereas Eric Lang is more like, you know, your brain starts swimming in possibilities, and that's really where I wanted to go with this. So he started with like adding extra variants to Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation, and then did a lot of collectible card game designs, like Star Wars, the card game. He was in the original Game of Thrones. He's done several collectible card games. And then very recently, as in the last 6 years, I guess, so kind of more in when I got into the hobby, he had started doing Dudes on a Map games. So he started.
The one who did Monopoly Tropical Tycoon as well.
He could be, Andy, but I am not sure. I'll leave it to somebody who's got the powers of Board Game Geek at their fingertips to maybe answer that one. Let's see. The first things that I saw him do was like Chaos in the Old World, which I think is where he captured the heart of TC.
Yes, I love Chaos in the Old World. And that's really sad because I can't recommend it because it's out of print. But if you're ever near my vicinity, I do have a copy with painted minis.
You painted them yourself?
No. Oh, hell no. I had someone else paint those because if I painted them, it would not look as good.
Fair enough, man. I wish I had a copy of that game with painted minis. It's a really cool looking game. One that's known for having like a very dark theme in board gaming where your asymmetric players all of you controlling an extremely different old like god of this old world. You know, you're sort of like these gods that almost feel like you're playing as demons. You know, like the god of
land,
plague and
putting
the
out
god
your
of
cultists out. Yes, so good. The board's like a piece of stretched out skin. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, and I think that
if it was made today, it would be cause quite the uproar, I'm sure.
I don't know, dude. I think that right now we've gotten maybe even more desensitized than we were 6 years ago towards just like outward violence in a fantasy setting that's not directed towards any specific group. You know, I mean, it's like you can't really say. I mean, Warhammer 40K, the whole world is just like everybody killing each other. It's just like, you know, it's just a war cry in universe form. So it's. I would say though that what Chaos in the Old World really does well is it kind of dovetails with its content. So, you know, it's certainly helped bring a lot of miniatures gamers that play Warhammer 40K. And it took that sort of Warhammer 40K and set it more, you know, it successfully applied a lot of different buzzwords like asymmetric powers, and sort of the, you know, turn-based play where you've got a much more easy to interact with map. A lot of just really kind of, I would almost call them Euro aspects, but still firmly in the, like, you know, dice chucking. Like it's still at its heart, its combat is a dice chucking. You know, people who are comfortable with Warhammer 40K are not going to play this one and be like, oh, it doesn't have my dice. You know, it's
going got to bursting dice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it even has that exploding dice that is one of his almost trademark signatures, I would say. So Chaos in the World is really where I think he converted into full on like the tabletop aspect of from being in more of the card game designer, you know, but obviously doing a little bit of other work as well. So that was his big kind of breakout into tabletop, and since then it has just been lots of production. And his highest rated games, one of his highest rated games right now is Blood Rage, which I would say is like an extremely controversial title because it seems to get hate from people on both ends of like people who want Euro games and don't want conflict, really like enjoy aspects, but it makes a lot of people. I think what it does is it leads more people to try it because like it has these elements that's like, oh, card drafting. You know, I can draft cards and I can actually win by losing battles. You know, it adds that sort of aspect to it. But it also, because more people are trying it, you're hearing a lot more negative reviews. A lot more people who are like, "This is not for me. I hate this. You know, it's not for me." And I think on that same token, though, you see people that are like really looking for another Chaos in the Old World. And this might be where you sit on it, TC. I'm not exactly sure. Where they dislike Blood Rage because they're like, there wasn't enough, like there wasn't dice rolling in this game. You know, there wasn't enough of the sort of drama and the chaos that I'm looking for from my dudes on a map, dice rolling battle games. And there was a really interesting argument that sort of like placed, that sort of countered the Blood Rage is not an Ameritrash game, or it doesn't have the, you know, the drama that you would expect from other dudes on a map games. And it was like the amount of turbulence and chaos that takes place in a given round cannot be present in a Euro game, is what one of the, like, a recent top 50 list that I saw by somebody whose other top games were all like straight up, you know, lots of dice chucking, lots of battles, lots of, you know, what people would associate with like Ameritrash. I don't mean to use that term pejoratively. I just think that right now it's a term that people know. You know, you could say thematic, but this goes a step further. It's like a conflict heavy dice rolling game. So Blood Rage, extremely interesting, but yeah, like very polarizing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like some of my favorite Eric Lang games are games that typically people don't know a whole lot about. Like I have this dice train game called Trains and Stations that WizKids did. That's actually pretty good. I thought the Star Wars, the card game that he designed, was fantastic. The way that you built that deck, you just shuffled factions together. Warhammer Conquest, another LCG he did, was up until Legend of the Five Rings, was probably the most strategic card game I've ever played. It was really good. And then he goes around and he designs the Munchkin collectible card game, which is actually really good in its own right, which is surprising.
His work in developing like these sorts of kernels of ideas for collectible or living card games that can continue to be developed by teams and continue to be successful, like, you know, Star Wars the card game, Game of Thrones the card game, now Munchkin the card game. I mean, he's really got a lot of the things that have been around for more than a decade started with Eric Lang and then got turned into like a brand by Fantasy Flight. And so I agree, TC, that like he's probably maybe he does the best job of making card games that board gamers really like.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Trent?
I can see what you're getting at. I think that, I mean, the one I had experience with them is Game of Thrones, which is originally his design, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
That's the number one. And yeah, I can understand exactly what you mean by the board game-ish feel in a card game.
Mm-hmm. Where it's like, because when you sold me on Game of Thrones, Trent, like you were one of the people who got me into, that was like my first ever collectible, my first ever pre-constructed deck game. And you sold me on that by like, you have these choices at different points, and what choice you make impacts everything from here on out. And it's not just you're at the mercy of whatever you've drawn from your deck. It seems like he does some extra things to try to, have elements of the game where it's not just, hey, what 6 cards or what 7 cards do I have and what can I do with them?
Yeah, that's an aspect I like of games like that. And she definitely did that, at least with Game of Thrones. I can't comment on Munchkin because I haven't played it, but the Munchkin collectible card game. But I will say with Game of Thrones, he definitely feels like a board game on cards.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I can add in with Eric Lang that's amusing, because I haven't really played Blood Rage or much of his games, was when Blood Rage came out and they were like demoing it at Gen Con, did you guys hear what was happening with him?
No, what was
They had the publisher there and all that, and it was really popular. And was it Cool Mini or Not who did this one?
Yeah, Cool Mini or Not did it, yeah.
Yeah, so they had brought him in to like demo it, and he kept walking around. He's like, "Look how great these miniatures are!" And he'd like take it off the table, throw it on the ground, and like jump up and down on it.
Yeah.
He's like, "It doesn't break at all!" And like the publisher was like,
Yeah, he's gonna turn into like that Napoleon Dynamite where he tries to drive over the Tupperware in the van, and it just smashes underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just lately. Like, I played Blood Rage, and I was like, it's okay, but I prefer Chaos in the Old World. And then I tried, was it The Godfather, the game? I was like, it's okay, but I prefer Chaos in the Old World. And then Rising Sun comes out, and I'm like, it's okay, but I prefer my Chaos in the Old World. It's really strange. I can't put my finger on it. It's like every one of those games takes that game and like does something different with it, but it's like, I like this one. It has all the stuff I like. You're taking the stuff I like out. I can't really put my finger on it. It's really strange.
No, I can kind of see that, TC, because knowing how like your favorite game is Rex, and knowing just of those games, I would say that Chaos in the Old World is most similar to Rex. Like, I think you come at it from an angle where your favorite game is the one that emphasizes most the sort of high drama, and really focus on. Like the combat in Chaos in the Old World has dice resolution. It has exploding dice. It has stuff that you can be like, when you're trying to sell a game, TC, at a game night, you're going to say totally different things to sell that game than I would.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to be like, come and play this. It has explosions.
Yeah, like every time I bring out Chaos in the Old World and I have a new player, I'm like, you want to play Crone? Well, why? Because you're going to march around the board and kill all of us, and you're going to have a lot of fun. And Kate loves playing that faction because she starts watching that guy around, and everybody else is like, "Oh, we gotta get out of the way, guys! Here comes this thing with the big axe! Oh my god!"
Well, TC, when you want to sell a game, you're going to capture like a feeling or a memory, kind of similar to what Jeff Gamble said in his top 10. And I think that's how like that game is going to have those big moments like that. Whereas, like, Trent's favorite game is Diplomacy, one of his favorite games, I want to say, but he turns every game into Diplomacy.
Yes.
And that's why I think Rising Sun goes most with your taste, Trent. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say that. That's probably
compared to Eric Lang's other games. I mean, that's
out of all the Eric Lang games I've played, Game of Thrones, the card game, and Rising Sun are my two favorites easily.
okay.
I don't even hesitate to say that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I can appreciate what is coming from in Rising Sun more than I mean I enjoyed Chaos in the Old World, but it did have like I don't know, it wasn't my style as much, TC. I can see why it would be yours, and I would definitely play it. You know, I enjoyed it. For me, I think when it comes down to it though, like I know that it's kind of cliched or it's just kind of the one that was most popular, but like Blood Rage to me is the one that like, you know, when I think about a game that I want to show to all my buddies that don't know games, it's like this is one that's going to show them like, hey, this is a game where you like knowledge of the game system is going to help you to do better here. Whereas in Rising Sun, it's going to be knowledge of the other players that's going to help you do better. And in Chaos in the Old World, it's knowledge of the die. And it's not knowledge. It's the absence of knowledge. It's like having emptiness where your head should be is going to help you.
I'd like to point out none of us mentioned Quarriors as an Eric Lane game we like.
Oh, I forgot, dude. I hated Quarriors. I'm sorry, but it was just like even the guy that was teaching me it was just like it seemed like he was reluctant. I was like, why do you own this game? You seem like you hate this. So I don't know. Dice Masters as well. So he's done quite a bit of interesting stuff, mixing together dice rolling and a card game in Dice Masters. I didn't even mention that, but that's where a lot of people have experience with Eric Lang's designs and don't even realize they do.
Yeah, he's a diverse designer. I mean, it's always fun to at least try a game of his.
I can see that he loves drama, and he loves like he loves also though putting decisions in front of gamers that are going to change how they interact with each other and with the game. And I think that's kind of cool. Not my favorite designer, but one that I thought for a showcase would be interesting to sort of take a look at from a lens. So anyway, let's go ahead now and backtrack a little bit to what TC was talking about earlier, which is a game, Welcome to Centerville, and it's designed by Chad Jensen.
Yeah, I figured, you know, it was interesting because we talked about having a showcase, and I've been playing Centerville, and I was like, you know what, we should talk about Chad Jensen. I think, you know, we could have a little controversy, you know, and have some disagreement, but Chad Jensen is a designer that I really enjoy just because I have no idea what the heck this guy's going to throw out next when he designed games. And he's probably the designer that I like the most, who always has the most comments thrown at him in terms of game design. Because anytime I play a Chad Jensen game, there's always someone at the table who complains about one of four things. And it was interesting because I was looking at the comments on some of his other games, and it seems to be a near universal thing that I thought would be fun to discuss. Now, Chad Jensen is probably most famous for one of two games, either Dominant Species or the game he designed before that one, which is Combat Commander. Combat Commander was an attempt to, in my opinion, to streamline ASL and make squad combat more accessible by using cards instead of dice and all kinds of stuff. And it was a two-player game. And I played that one twice, and that game just has like a tremendous amount of replayability in it. And that's before you get into like different theaters of war, all the expansions. It is a very highly regarded war game from GMT. And then he like just went crazy and had this nuts idea and designed a game called Dominant Species, which is one of my favorite cube pushers. It is like literally the one of the more vicious things I've ever seen. And the first time you play it, you just take it. And either you enjoy it or you complain about it.
About the time someone blights one of your tiles,
yeah,
that'll tell you whether you either A, hate this game, or B, love this game.
And then he went on to design a really controversial game that I enjoy, which is Urban Sprawl, which I am very happy to say Trent enjoys that game with me, which was a nice surprise from the last time we recorded. I thought I was going to be this.
You and I and three other people.
Okay, cool. So I found the club. And then he's also done like Dominant Species, the card game, and Welcome to Centerville. I think there's a few other things, but those are the big ones. Now, anytime you play a Chad Jensen game, you're probably going to hear one of four things, and I'm going to list them off right now. And if you have to understand that Chad is primarily came from war game design, And he likes, from what I can tell, my experience is that he likes designing games where you have to know how the game works, and there is like no seatbelts or safety airbags or anything. If you don't play the way the game is meant to be played, you don't understand the design, the game will own you and you will eat it bad. And so like one of the big complaints is like, especially if you guys have played Dominant Species with people who didn't like it, please say I'm not alone in that. So I'm sure you, yeah. So tell me if this doesn't sound familiar. Here's the first complaint against the Chad Jensen game that I'd like to discuss. First one, too much luck. I hear that so much when I play Dominant Species. Like, oh, when those cards came out, it was just lucky that you got dominance first and you were able to grab that card that came out and just use it against me, and that's not fair. I hear that a lot from Combat Commander, where that unless you know how those 72 cards work in your deck, there's a lot of randomness in that thing that can hit you hard unless you understand how that works. And you hear too much luck a lot in Urban Sprawl.
No.
But there's not. Urban Sprawl, I would argue, is a game about managing risk and knowing how everything scores in that nature. So what do you guys think? Too much luck in a Chad Jensen game?
No.
No, I don't think so. Maybe
I wouldn't agree, at least when it comes also to Dominant Species, because you can very much manipulate it to where you're going to get dominance first. You know, if you're worried about particular cards, then you should have moved your dang initiative up so you could grab dominance first, shouldn't you? I.e., play better.
Get good. What were you going to say, Trent? What do you think?
I think a lot of those games, part of the skill in the game is understanding somewhat of what the contents of the cards are. Like, I assume that if you play it more times, you're going to have a better sense of what the contents of those decks are, and thus you're going to have a better sense of what you should be planning ahead for. So, to me, there is a little bit of luck on the card flop, sure, but to me, there's at least as much skill that you're going to build up over multiple plays and simply knowing what's in that deck. That's not skill. That's like repeated play and learning strategy.
Okay, here's the second thing you're going to hear. The second thing I hear a lot about Chad Jensen games is it's too much randomness in it. And I heard this one quite a bit playing Combat Commander, and I heard it a lot playing Urban Sprawl, because in Urban Sprawl, once you go through the town deck and you start working on that city deck, you better put on a 5-point harness, because that's when all the events are going to start hitting. If you're not prepared for those things, it's going to seem random as all get out.
I kind of, I guess, think of this as being still under the subset of luck. Like, randomness leads to a game being luckier. So I've not played anything, you know, beyond Dominant Species, but I do not, like, I disagree that there's too much randomness in the game.
Yeah, the claim is randomness I hear in Dominant Species is just that card pool when those cards come out. Because I've played games of Dominant Species where if the right 5 set of cards come out, that thing's going to clear the board of everything. And that's just too random.
I would argue still, though, there's things you can do to prepare and mitigate the damage you can take in any of that.
The third thing I hear, are you got anything on that, Trent, about randomness, or do you just, it's crap?
Yes, there's randomness in the game. Again, it can be mitigated by good play. To me, Chad's games are a good example of how an experienced player can mitigate randomness and still win. He does that really well. That's what all his games end up being about. I'd say that's true in Dominant Species to the least extent, but definitely true in Urban Sprawl, and definitely true in Welcome to Centerville, and definitely true in Combat Commander. It's true in all of them. That's something that he kind of does well. It feels like there's a lot of chaos, but if you play it a few times, you realize that chaos is really manageable.
Yeah, you just have to know what it is going into it.
Yes, and that comes from replaying it.
And then if you only play it once, you don't play it again, it's like, well, okay, there's nothing I can do to convince you otherwise.
Yep, exactly.
Third big complaint I always hear a lot is his games are way too long. I hear this all the time with Dominant Species. Like, it's a good game, but it takes too long to play. Now, I'm used to playing games like Here I Stand and all this other stuff that take like 8 hours to a day. So if I don't consider those games too long, then I'm in no position to argue that, that this game is too long. Maybe it's too short for me. And even in Urban Sprawl, there are rules to make a shorter game. It says that if you want a shorter game, do this.
Well, I think, once again, I haven't played a lot of his games, but Dominant Species, the first time you play it, it is going to be long. But once again, once you know Dominant Species, you got a couple games under your belt, that game can go pretty dang fast.
Yeah, you're only playing usually like 5-6 rounds. It's not that long.
Yeah.
No. I mean, it is. If you did like
at least 6 rounds. Sorry, 6 or 7.
If you did a 6-player game where most people were inexperienced and that was your first experience in the game, yeah, it probably did take a stupid amount of time.
Right, Trent?
Yeah, I've played some very, 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 very long games of Dominant Species. Yeah,
Yeah, but I think that the link. I think that the link is because they just stare at you're just waiting for someone to put an AP marker, which I think is hilarious. It's called an AP marker, right? Those people are like, no. No, let's just put it down. It doesn't matter because it's probably going to get wrecked anyway when I take the volcano card. So don't worry about it.
I was thinking about that. I was like, do you have special pieces that you put in front of players when they're not taking long, when they're not doing their turns that you call AP markers? It's like, no, you're referring to Dominant Species action pawns.
Yeah, they're actually called AP markers. It's hilarious. I'm like, are you APing on your AP marker?
I want to make medals for things like that. You have to wear the AP medal now because you take too long.
Yeah.
It's like the dunce cap. No, honestly, I think even Dominant Species, if you had 6 people who knew what they were doing, I don't think the game would go that long. I think it's a case of people learned it their first time. It seemed to take forever with them, and so they didn't play it again.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, this is my top one because I get tired of hearing it, and that is, this game's too swingy. And boy, and I always take pains when I explain Dominant Species. I'm like, you have got to understand in this game, dominance is going to score again in the final round. If you don't go into this game anticipating that, and you let someone just have a whole lot of dominance, you just gave them the game. And I explained that, and they forget about it, and then it happens like, oh, that's ridiculous. That's just way too many points, and it just swung. This game's too swingy. The volcano was swingy. The in-game scoring was swingy. But it's to me, it's like understanding the design, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you give me all the dominance and I told you not to, then it's not my fault.
Yeah. Well, I think that really, like, all these things that are these criticisms, TC, I think that you've already said it, but these are coming from people that have played the game once, and really, like, where Chad's games become interesting is that, like, your first game, you're just figuring out what the events are. You're going to see every single one of those events in every game of Dominant Species. You're going to see, like, that catastrophe with the volcano, like, that sort of should be hanging over your head until it comes out, telling you, like, hey, if you don't diversify where you're at, you could become extinct pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So,
well, also, I don't know about his other games, but with Dominant Species, and this is like, I think one of my things my wife didn't like say about Settlers of Catan, if you quote unquote play well and you get really far ahead of everyone in the early game, and there's like take that mechanisms within the game, you're setting yourself up to be the target. Let's understand what you're doing here. Yes, you played well and got 30 points ahead of me, and now it's time to kick your teeth in for that. That's how it works. Don't make yourself a target.
I do think, though, that balances with what TC's been saying about complaints that at the end game there's a lot of scoring, and that's like, I mean, if you have that early, like, Chad seems to have already done the thinking on that, where it's like if you get out ahead, the game has interaction, and also that at the end of the game, there's a lot of points that are scored. So, I mean, to me, these are facets. These are not complaints that you can lodge against the game to say it's a poor game. It's a poor design. These are just things that clearly this was an intentional part of the design. Maybe that's not what you enjoy, but it's, like understanding and knowing what's in the card deck. It's kind of the same way as what Murr was saying in our comments about Blood Rage. Blood Rage is best enjoyed by people who understand the composition of the cards that you're going to be drafting prior to actually playing the game. Like figuring out what cards do what is a frustrating experience, and it leads a lot of people to reject it. And I think that's one way in which we can maybe connect Eric Lang to Chad Jensen, is that like that, you know, these designs largely have legs that allow players to understand the system, memorize the relatively limited amount of cards that are in the game that you're going to be seeing in some capacity at all times, and then be able to react accordingly.
Yeah, and Chad Jensen taught me one of my biggest lessons as a when I talk about board games with people or even attempt to review them, and that is, it's important that when you talk about a game or attempt to review it, you review it what it is, not what you want it to be. And especially with Chad Jensen, I always see people get frustrated because they're not playing the game as it's designed. They want to play it the way they want to play it, and it costs them the game. And they start complaining like, you know, all these things are wrong with them. Stuff like, no, that's the game you want, right? That's not the game this is.
Yeah.
So so I have to thank Chad for that great insight into my board gaming podcasting career.
But that's a pretty deep, like, when you criticize a game and say it's not the game you want it to be, it's the game, like, call it what it is, like, that makes it really difficult to say, because I feel like you might be able to levy that against any complaint anybody's ever made against any game. You know, this game was supposed to be a broken turd of a game.
Well, what I'm trying to get in there is like, don't let your presuppositions like influence you what the game like. There's been a lot of games I play with people like, oh, it's a random card flop and all that stuff. But I'm like, yeah, that's what the game's kind of designed around. So, you know, I understand it's not your cup of tea, but it's not a broken game because of it.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's especially when you see anybody experiencing that in a learning environment, I feel like it should be able to be forgiven. I mean, you know, obviously it makes it more difficult when somebody doubles down later on and they're like, you know, man, I hated that game. And that's actually my experience with Dominant Species. I had my little brother who I love gaming with, but man, like I did not realize exactly what was his cup of tea. And we played Dominant Species and no. Nope. And every time I talk about how much, like, I'll just mention in passing how much I enjoy it, not trying to get him to play it. And then I'll remember, like, oh, yeah, like, this is one of those few games that he knows well enough to say, like, I hate this game. So,
and my copy of Urban Sprawl, if someone just really flips out and says they'll never play it again, I have them sign the inside of the box. And my goal is to fill that up as much as I can.
If they say that, so when your game gets done, you're like, will you ever play this again with me? And you're sitting there almost wanting them.
It's like, you hate that game? And like, yeah, it was random and I hated it and all this crazy stuff happened. I'm never playing this again. I'm like, will you sign my box? And leave your mark on the legacy of this box. It's not
people
quite
actually
cool,
say
but
yes
I've got
to
some
that?
signatures in it.
Oh my God. Actually, they do it. That's hilarious.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I've got a few signatures in it. Yeah.
That is funny.
And that makes it feel like they contributed something, and it just reinforces my point that, you know, we're all having fun anyway. If you don't like it, that's cool. Leave your mark. Have fun.
Definitely. So that was Chad Jensen, and that was TC's Designer Spotlight. Let's go ahead and move into Andy and let Trent round it all out here.
Yeah. So it was interesting this morning because I was torn of who. There was two designers I was thinking of, and this morning made me pick one of them. So I'm going to highlight Phil Eklund, who probably designs the games I look forward to most in a year. And kind of piggybacking what you guys are talking about, I think he's gotten popular enough to where people know what the games are, and people buy the games not understanding what they're going to get out of it. So Phil Eklund runs a company called Sierra Madre Games. Sierra Madre games are often described as like educational games for adults, which I may or may not disagree with depending on the day in the game. But okay, so what are they then? So Sierra Madre games are primarily simulation games to a greater or lesser extent, depending on whether it falls on the history line or the science line and the game itself. It would include things like Bios Megafauna, which is about the evolution of life, through hardship and circumstances. You've got games like PAX Renaissance, who are about the interplays of banking families and how they may or may have not influenced the Renaissance. The games are kind of, I don't know the way to describe. It's hard to. They're very eclectic. They're all kind of card games. They all do some interesting things with cards. Some of them have dice, which you may or may not be rolling for things. But the games are primarily designed to teach or explore a topic. Now, one of the things kind of this morning in the snafu on Twitter that resulted around Sierra Madre games is the games are ultimately designed because Phil has a question. And he stated that many times, that he designs his game because he has an interest in a topic. He doesn't fully understand that topic, and he wants to create a simulation for himself as well as others that will help him learn a little bit about that topic. And so when you play the games, you've got to understand the position he is coming from. So, for example, the game Neanderthal is based on his understanding of sort of the development of human language and other things. And some of those, the theories that the game are based on are well-established ones. Some of them are very controversial theories that, you know, Phil may or may not actually think is correct, but he wants to see how would that work out. From what I've heard is he can be very argumentative, but that he enjoys that. That's not actually that he's mad that someone's challenging him. He just enjoys the aspects of arguing it.
It's a discourse, an intelligent discourse. I can appreciate that. And
Paul Worley has said that in many times, that he actually values his arguments with Phil Eklund. But you've got to understand that that's what the games are about. They're about his ideas and exploring ideas and what he wants out of them. I have never been disappointed in them, knowing that going into them. But, you know, for example, today, though, some of the topics in such, some individuals or an individual found upsetting caused them to basically go on a giant Twitter rant and, like, essentially accuse Phil of being a racist, misogynist, and stuff like that. And the whole time I'm sitting there going, dude, like, these games are based on scientific or historic principles. These things happened. Like, if it's misogynist, it's because history was misogynist. Like, people were horrible to women in the past. Like, you can't put a modern spin on that. You can't go back to, like, the Renaissance or something and go, okay, let's make this an equal society. It wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like wanting him to be revisionist in history, and Phil's like a scientist by trade, right?
Yeah, he's a retired rocket scientist. That's why if you ever look at the board at High Frontier, your brains will explode out the back of your head. But no, I mean, because there was literally in Neanderthal and Greenland, and this was one of the few times he made a concession, but there essentially was rape, stealing of women from other tribes. This happened. Like, is it really a great aspect of humanity? No. Is he saying that, hey, this is an okay way to behave? No. Did it historically happen? Yeah. Like, that's part of it.
I don't hear people making that sort of an argument. Like, the argument, and obviously, I don't want to let one person and their, one person's argument style or one person's specific maybe oversights characterize an entire movement, because, like, getting to the place where we, where we're all on an equal playing field. I think that's something that, is an important goal to have in mind. But, like, Game of Thrones clearly involves the same topics that you're talking about.
Right.
But is everything okay because this is like a fantasy world? Like that's certainly not the point with like the writer of Conan the Barbarian, or even the game design group that, that came up with essentially a nude woman that was being, like, toted around by Conan as if she was luggage. Like, I mean, there's different, like, first of all, like when you're talking about that, Andy, like having that be an aspect of it, it's an aspect clearly, like, it's an internal like fear that's happening, that's in the minds of people that are Game of Thrones characters that are narrating it. What makes that treatment so much different?
Well, in my view, here's the thing, is it does ultimately depend on the purpose of which you're making the game for. And, here's the other thing, I guess, on one aspect of it. If you're talking about legitimate things that happened, like, historical principles, to me, that's a little bit different in the sense, like, it's not like you're pulling it out of thin air. It's like these things legitimately happened. Whereas, if you're making a new fantasy thing, then, well, you can write your own world if you want to. And, Conan, I understand, is based on novels that were written. But I think in the thing about Conan, here's the deal. If your games are based on already existing ideas, be it historic or fantasy or other things, understand the context to which these belong. So with Conan, if you understand Conan, you understand when they were written. If you look at the period they were written, the kind of things he did weren't that far outside of normal.
Mm-hmm. But does it deserve to be copied and pasted in this modern day?
Well, I guess here's my thing of it. It depends on the purpose. So, like I said, if you're going into historical games like Sierra Madre games, those are not, well, they can be dependent, but for the most part, they're not being played just for the aspect of a fun game.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to kind of work through a problem or to get you to think about a concept a little differently. And so I guess in that case, I'm a little more forgiving of that kind of thing. Conan, I can forgive somewhat because in their desire, they were like, here's how the original books were written. We were trying to stay true to the theme of those books. Okay. Do I still object to some of that? Yeah, a little bit. But I guess here's the thing where I would have more of an issue. If you're making an entirely new game around, let's say you're making a new dungeon crawl. Let's compare apples and apples here, because the Conan game was essentially a dungeon crawl, right? If you're writing your own world and you're doing the kind of stuff that the Conan did, like, I would have less sympathy for that. Because it's like, okay, you had your own way to make this and you still chose to be misogynist about it. Whereas Conan, like, that's kind of already established. Like,
maybe that's why, maybe that stuff shouldn't be produced, because it's established, and since we understand what it stands for, then we should be careful around it. The thing is, though, Phil is not choosing to permeate like a specific IP. Like you said, Andy, he's approaching these things scientifically. Like, he's not going to skirt around an issue because it's not, it's not appropriate or something, or it's not politically correct. The thing is, like, I think that he probably, I think that he understands political correctness, and here's why. Sensitivities are almost always what he addresses in his rule books. Like, something that would be a sensitivity, and he kind of explains why that's a part of the game, and it very frequently comes down to, like, hey, this is the way that this is. This is the way that this was. It was a part of life. And I think that, like, I don't think that he's glorifying it. To me, that's the word. The word is glorify. And if what Phil Eklund is doing in his games is glorifying this aspect, and saying that, like, this is the truly heroic tribe was the one that raped all of the people. Like, that's different. That's not anything I've ever heard of that's come across. That's, in my experience with Phil Eklund games, like, anytime that you have, like, him making a statement about, like, why are women absent from this game, it's like, hey, this is set in the Renaissance, and at this time, unfortunately, there's very little evidence that women had an impact on a level with others, and he does put women in the game as they were in that time. He's not saying that, like, this is how the world should be today. It is an exploration of a time period. is an exploration of interactions. And if you try to supplant revisionist histories, it's like putting a contaminating aspect into a petri dish. It's going to grow some sort of a mold. And that's not what Phil's games are about.
Yeah, they're not about making you feel cushy and happy about things. They're meant to explore certain ideas and concepts.
And he actually is willing to talk about them, though. I mean, like, who's worse?
No, he doesn't shy away from any of that.
Who's worse? Like, by actually being open to the discussion, I think that's a step forward. And like, I think Trent had some really interesting perspectives on like what Phil may or may not even be guilty of in this debate. But like, who's worse? Puerto Rico, which had colonists, where they're like a piece that very much represents the slave, and they call them colonists as if to just sort of avoid the issue. It's as if that was sort of like done in the in the sort of sensitivities testing, when you like what do they call that when you have like your sort of focus groups or whatever, when you just make sure that it doesn't do this. Like, I don't know, Trent, what do you think?
Testing.
Focus group testing.
For example, I find way more objectionable things going on in Fortress America than I do in virtually any game I've ever played by Phil Eklund.
Yeah.
I mean,
conceptually.
Yes. I don't see
it really quickly why.
Okay. The biggest issue I have is as you've been saying over and over again, a lot of these games are obviously designed as something sort of simulation of a past event or some sort of phenomenon Phil wants to take on. He pretty intentionally throws everything but the kitchen sink in a lot of these designs. Some of them go down to an absurd level of like going down a rabbit hole of a particular idea, and they go all over the place, and there's no set way to win, and it's just like throwing pieces together to see how it works. I think a lot of those games are to like, more than anything, is to bring people aware of this existing and this being an issue, and then you want to go more and find out about it. Mm-hmm. I think that's a key.
It's a key facet of his designs. I absolutely would agree with that.
You might find pieces in his game that are objectionable that you might want to say this is criticism. I think he's cool with that and invites that. That's part of the point. Part of the point is to talk about this stuff. That's why it's there. To come out of an experience like that where someone's trying to have a conversation about it, just label that person on whole as a racist, sexist, or whatever you want to do, and then throw a match on the bridge and walk away is childish.
Yeah, I think that we've kind of addressed this before a little bit, that like, addressing it to the human being, like here's the biggest thing that can be frustrating. When you see somebody who says, this person did not uniformly reject and condemn all games by this designer. This person, how can you possibly do this? Trent, you did not uniformly reject games by Fantasy Flight, because Fortress America comes out and it's like basically America versus the world. Why? We don't know, but it certainly fuels a whole lot of like nationalist sentiment in America, and it sort of like almost feels like what our country's been preparing for, even though there's no indication that would ever be the case. How can you do that? Like, how can any of you listening right now listen to this guy who won't reject the entire company of Fantasy Flight because they have one game, or even just address like, why don't we have a discussion about this? That's the thing, like poison that well because one person won't just entirely across the board reject something. And yeah, it's one of those things where like ignorance is not just become a value of sorts on one side of the political spectrum of the politically correct debate. Ignorance exists on both ends.
Yeah, and that's the thing is there's different ways of approaching gaming in general, and that's part of like the designer showcase here is each designer, they're working for a different purpose. Sierra Madre has always been about, does he want people to have fun playing his game? Sure. But I think really the goal of Sierra Madre is not only to produce a game that you have fun playing, but that provokes interesting discussion. And a game with that goal in it is going to look different than a game by, say, Fantasy Flight. And you've got to understand that going into it. I think people play, people hear about all these Phil Eklund games because he's starting to get popular now. And they're like, oh, these will be fun. I'll play one of those. But they don't go into it understanding that aspect of it's there to provoke discussion. And like anything that's going to provoke discussion, there's going to be things you like about it. There's going to be things you don't like about it. What was it? Vlada Shavatal, that was the thing he always said about his games. I would rather have a good amount of people that both love and hate my games than a whole lot of meh. Because if all I get is like it's good or meh, that means I didn't do anything interesting.
Exactly. Like, the thing is, people are very polarized about Phil Eklund, and maybe that's...
And they should be. That's what the purpose of it is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, first off, and this was mentioned in our chat, but like, coming into it expecting a gaming experience similar to anything else, where you can like sort of take I don't know, almost like project yourself into the game, and think of yourself as having this sort of agency where you can actually choose your own destiny, is, I would say, setting yourself up for not enjoying a Phil Eklund experience, depending on the type of game. Oh,
if you play any of the science ones, if you think I'm going to control my destiny, you're out of your freaking mind. Those games are about mitigating like the world trying to kill you.
It's like you're sitting down together, and it's an experiment of sorts. It's like a bunch of simulated experiments and watching how they play out in card form. So it's not one that you're going to want to invest. So I mean, he initially, like, I think, pushes away a lot of people that way. It's like people come into it expecting something different. Now, if I had come into my first experience with the Phil Eklund game, expecting what it might characterize what I actually, even what I enjoy about the game, right? Like, I feel like maybe if somebody had told me like, hey, this is what you'd play this game for, then maybe I could have known what to look for. And maybe then in my sort of formative years into gaming, I would have like developed more of an interest in simulations, because I just, what happened to me was like, seeing that simulation take place in front of me just felt like this is all wrong. It's, all that gaming has prepared me for is not this. This is it's all wrong.
You have no control. No control.
Yeah. So, but it really, like, I could still see myself turning on to Phil's science games and other things because I understand the perspective you guys come from. Now, obviously, the arguments that we've seen recently in the last few days regarding Phil Eklund and regarding, trying to throw certain people, certain personalities that do not unanimously reject Phil Eklund's games because of the content that's present in some of them, and people sort of like almost turning a deaf ear towards the actual content that they're using as criticism to say that Phil Eklund games are a certain way. I think that obviously there's an issue in our argument there, but when it comes down to it, like, one of the main things is there's an article in Pax Pamir that's called "In Defense of British Colonialism." Now, who wants to talk about this? Who can talk about
I'll
this?
take that because I reread it today because that seems to be the sticking point. Like, that's one of the ones people use as a rallying cry, like, against him, kind of. And if you read the essay, I think the only truly really bad part about that essay is the title.
Yeah.
Because if you read the essay very closely, the essay is not trying to make the point that colonialism is a universal good. What he's doing, because he even starts out like saying this was bad. But there's a lot of people that want to live in a world that's black and white. That, okay, colonialism automatically equals bad in every respect. If you look at the colonialism he was talking about, though, British in India, like, they abolished slavery, which he considers almost a universal good, like slavery sucks. It improved the economy of this. It gave them more literacy. So like everything else that's true and complicated in life, it's gray. And what he was saying there was that, yes, colonialism really sucked for a lot of reasons, but here are some potential benefits the society gained from that. Now, is he saying that that's always a good way to go? No, but you can't just look at one thing and say it's all bad. When I was taking American religions classes in college, somehow we got on this topic. I don't remember how, but they were talking about sweatshops in China. And the guy who was doing this presentation for this class said, we in America would view sweatshops as universally a bad thing. However, we did go through our own little social experiment of sweatshops as a country. And he's like, even though they're universally bad, if you look at the difficulty of life in a sweatshop compared to a life of subsistence farming, the sweatshop actually isn't a bad step upwards. Now, would you prefer they not have to make that step? Yes. But is it better than what they were doing before? Maybe it was. So I think the aspect of a simulation game is that you have to acknowledge that this is trying to replicate real life. And real life in real life society is gray. It's not black and white.
Yeah, Andy, it's different areas of gray. And the thing is, when people take a stand, it's like they're trying to make it out into black and white, because why would you go, like, it's tough to convince somebody to come just slightly over. Whereas
it's only gotten more tough as time goes on. Like, that's the thing.
The thing is, like, it doesn't, there's no battle to fight. And so you're not going to get anybody on your side unless you make it out to be like the end of the world. And I think that's where it's just turned into a whole mess with social media. I mean, I think it was maybe Ray in our chat from the Good Word Ugly community that suggested Black Mirror. And there's probably others in the chat that have suggested it before, and other friends of mine. But the show Black Mirror really explores the depths of like what are social media and what just our world being connected in technology. What type of impact are these things going to have when you take, like behaviors that you see people doing now and take them to their irrational conclusion. I think that's just like, this to me is an example of something that Black Mirror could take. Like, I haven't seen the entire series, but I feel like at some point there must be some sort of a way that they talk about how, like, when you can get the entire world up against somebody, what type of things you can, where does it stop? Where does it end? So to me, it's just something where we're not on, like, the members of this podcast generally, and TC, I know that you consider yourself a moderate, but like, I consider myself, like, when people use the word snowflake, usually I'm like, okay, fine, call me what you will, like call me whatever you want to. So like, I don't care. The thing is, like, this is me, a quote unquote snowflake, saying, please allow people to change. Allow people to change. Don't see them as a bad person that has no ability to make, to make changes in what they've created or whatever. It's the thing is, like, you take somebody out and you maybe, in the social world, doing that to somebody is just about as much as just murdering them. It's about the same as like running your car into them when you do something like that. So when you just, don't give them a chance to change. Don't see them as like somebody who deserves, to be treated like a human being anymore.
Well, to me, it kind of comes down to, because, well, like I told some people in chat, like I left my job teaching. Last week was my last week with students for at least a year to do some stuff with my family. and they let us kind of address the students when I was done. And one of the things I told them was, hey, go on, do awesome things in your life. Try to look at someone and always assume best intentions. Try to be nice to each other. There's way too much anger and hatred in the world right now, and it doesn't need to be that way. When I get on social media now, one of the things that I truly value that people have said about me is I always try to uplift people rather than rip them down. And I think that's what we need more of. And that's the thing, is going back to Phil Eklund in the game design, and kind of the last point to make, I guess, regarding all of this is you can look at his design and assume bad character traits. Or you could choose to look at the design and go, hey, maybe he's trying to get a discussion going about this topic, and designing of games happens to be his way of doing that. I tend to personally go with the assume the best intention until I'm given a reason to think otherwise. And just making a game or an essay to do with what I know he's trying to do doesn't make me think that about his character. And so anyway, that gives you an idea. So the thing is, Phil Eklund games, are they going to be controversial going forward? Oh yeah, I bet you. What you thought some of the last ones were? Wait till the one coming out this year comes out.
Tax emancipation.
Oh yeah, if that doesn't spark some debates, I'm going to be.
Isn't it a cooperative game though? Hasn't he sort of changed his format a bit?
This one is cooperative or cooperative competitive, in that you're all trying to abolish slavery, but whoever abolishes it the best wins.
Sure, yeah. So like your goal would not be connected to like one player working antagonizing other players by being like the slave,
right. And the thing is, like, later this year coming out Hollandspiel wise is This Guilty Land, where one person is playing the pro-slavery.
I do not know, man. I do not know.
I don't know how that one will work either, but it'll be interesting to see.
Okay, I'm sure that there's a bigger argument there, but let's just say that seems like pushing it to an area that's going to be, especially if Hollandspiel ever gets more of a critical mass, that could be an unwise role.
Oh yeah, no, that I fully expect to see some interesting things about that game. Once again, though, I mean, it's a historically based game, and it's something that really happens. So I don't know.
But here's what I think: if you want to do something like that, though, Andy, you have to involve the affected group.
Yeah.
If you want to really push it here, now I don't think Phil is pushing it. I think he's just using some historical facts, and it's just these are like almost all these complaints are like for sort of like. It's never the goal, the central goal of the game. Like Pax Pamir is about like sort of all these different powers that were wrestling for control of a buffer territory, and it sort of goes in the rule book into depth about how like a buffer territory largely suffered from a lot of political instability because it was almost necessary that it existed to be in between larger powers, and as a result, it sort of spent its life in its history in turmoil, and that's more of like. Like it's not just about British colonialism, which is what that essay hung on. It was more of a criticism of a 2-page short, brief essay as opposed to the entire game. And yes, I do. I think that like you're seeing like Roseanne Barr being totally like drug under the bus for a racist tweet, and I do think that like that sort of a racist tweet, especially when she's representing a movement to a certain extent. Can needs to be something that gets like addressed, and it needs to be addressed in some way. I don't know what the right way to do what the best thing to do is, but like people are hanging on to like a something that's really like not the overarching goal of the game, and like there might be like one card that allows you to do an action that's like I don't even know, man. Having the affected group involved is really going to strengthen your position.
Right. And here's the thing though, and I guess the last thing for me to say about Phil Eklund is the fact that it sparks this kind of debate, period, is the reason I like Sierra Madre games. Because for me, personally, as an individual, my entertainment is thinking. Like, I enjoy, that's why I like heavy games, but I also like historically based games. Like, I like learning something or being provoked to thought by the game I'm playing. And so this is why, for example, I tend to not be that big on abstracts, because there's not a broad picture of something I'm learning out of it. So that's why I like Phil Eklund, because the game mechanics will be interesting, and I always come out of one, especially either just reading the rule book or doing that, I feel like I come out understanding or thinking about things a little bit differently than the way I went into it. And I think there's value in that. But if that's not what you're looking for and you're fun, then stay away from Sierra Madre.
Yeah. Or just go and assassinate their character, and there's no humans behind the games. They're just everybody simply, there is no human beings. They're simply just a collection of opinions and ideas that are there to be swung around like a lasso.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in the teaching world too. What was always fun as a teacher is someone would trash you on email because you did X, Y, and Z. And instead of emailing them back, call them back. So now it's like, talk to me in person, and let's see. And 9 times out of 10, that phone call will go way more politely and respectful than that email did.
Sage wisdom right there, Andy. Sage wisdom. Yeah. Yep. There's so much room for miscommunication in text.
Especially if I'm the one sending the text.
Yeah. Andy, I don't think there's much room for communication in your text.
Oh no, God, no. My wife tells me all the time if I'd asked her out by email, she would have said no.
She wouldn't have known that you were asking her out.
Yeah, she was basically like, either A, he's not asking me out, or B, this person's an idiot, and I don't want to date an idiot.
Or she just fire right back at you and be like, no, I'm pretty sure the Broncos won last night.
Yeah. No, it'd be more like this. It's like, A, were you asking me out? B, here's your grammar mistakes.
Nice. Well, that was Phil Eklund from Andy, and that was quite a designer showcase, man. I know it kind of like got into some other territory, but I think that it was hopefully a relevant discussion that will help us all moving forward, because this is just a little snow globe of board games. I'm talking about board games in general are a snow globe of society at large. And we have this hobby that brings us into face-to-face contact, and we value that so much that to see board gaming focused media fall into the same pitfalls as other social media, and just like all of the toxicity of a Reddit post, it's like a subreddit, like this is something that really we have the tools to be able to work around, right? And I'm not talking about a bad human being as to the, I'm not talking about a bad human being that tries to assassinate a character based on incomplete information, or just, in general, just trying to do that in general sucks. But like, I'm talking about that behavior. I do not want to say that this is a bad person, because obviously that's absolutely hypocritical. It's the opposite of what I'm trying to say. It's just that let's all just play games together. If you have some crap with somebody, just have a fun game with them. Face to face, you can't do those things. Or if you can, somebody will hit you across the side of the head with a board game. And only a few people have witnessed that, right, Trent?
Yes, and it was great.
Wow, thanks. I'm glad that's what you had to say for that. Trent, do you have a designer in mind now?
Yes, I was making sure that you weren't doing it. That was the deal. I thought you were actually going to do the designer. I was going to.
No, you had kind of hinted at who you're going to do, and I was like, I'll stay off of there. That's like I was waiting to react to what you guys said. I was actually thinking of waiting even until the topic to pick one, and that kind of backfired on me when you shone the spotlight in my face, and I was like, go ahead, Trent.
Okay. I want to talk about Martin Wallace. And this is going to be a good time. If you all remember, the reason I chose Martin Wallace is because he had designed the game on my top 10 of all time list that I did a month or two ago. He designed the #1 game on that list. And he also designed a game that came very close to making that list. Like, it was one of the very last cuts, and that other one was Brass. So my #1 game of all time was Age of Steam, and the game that almost made my cut was Brass. So you think, well, I'm going to talk all great and about how much I love Martin Wallace, and I'm not. That's the thing. I'm not going to talk about how I love Martin Wallace. What I'm going to say about Martin Wallace is this. When Martin Wallace actually finishes a game and carries it all the way through development and carefully develops a game, he can do great things. The problem is, I feel like 90 to 95% of his games that I have ever played, he got to about 80% done, called it good enough, and shipped it. Okay? And I feel that every time I play a Martin Wallace game that isn't Age of Steam or Brass, I can't think of another one where I did not feel that way about his game. And the thing is, he's starting to get, I think a lot of other people notice this too, because there are actually like some, especially in his more recent designs, there are some serious issues with them related to things that should have been plucked out in any sort of development. I'm obviously talking about, with, for example, A Few Acres of Snow. The Halifax Hammer problem was just a huge problem that it fundamentally broke the game. Now he's got a game, Lincoln, that has virtually the same problem. There are a lot of other games. Mythotopia had something similar to that going on. I didn't dig into it. And then there's a lot
about the end game in Mythotopia. I don't remember.
Yes, there's an end game issue in Mythotopia. There was a card at the omnibus in London that was basically overpowered, and basically it became a race to see who could get a second omnibus and just win. London First Edition. This is a repeated thing with him. And then not only that, even the games where this isn't relatively obvious, I sit down a lot of times and I play many of his designs and I feel like this game was almost a good game. It's 90% of the way there. And then somewhere, like, it just didn't get finished. And so, like, I puzzled over this, and what I came to realize is when I went to start looking into his designs, he pumps out a lot of complex designs each year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to bring up. Do you think this might be the fact that board gaming is his livelihood, thus he must get games out fast enough to make a living off of it?
Yes, I think that is exactly the issue with Martin Wallace. I think if you roll back the clock to 2001, 2002, 2003, when he was bringing out stuff like Brass and Age of Steam, like his earlier games, those were designed during a period where I don't believe he was doing this full time. And then on the success of those, he leaped to doing it full time. And then from there, I think he started to feel like a financial need to get more games out. And now they're not nearly as finished and polished, and thus they're not as good. The thing is, I could love A Few Acres of Snow. I really could. But it's just not quite there. And the same is for a lot of the other ones I mentioned. And that's the reason I didn't get too deep into talking about MOA. I felt the same way about MOA. Not that it was broken, but that it hadn't been polished at all. Mm-hmm. And I find this really frustrating. I would way rather him produce one game a year that's polished like Brass or Age of Steam than 4 games
like Brass.
Yeah, I tongue-in-cheek, yes, tongue-in-cheek. But I'd way rather he have one game a year that's polished like those and really good and a classic because I know he can make them. And I felt like a lot of his more recent games have gotten close to that, but he just doesn't finish it. And that's so frustrating to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, in like the way and maybe I'm wrong about this, but the people that I've kind of heard of that do board gaming professionally, i.e. this is where they make their livelihood, they typically do a lot of light games while they're working on a heavy game. Like, I thought I heard this once, but Nuno and Paulo Soledad, the designers of Madeira, they produce a lot of mass market games. They're just mass market in Portugal. But they produce a lot of those, and that's kind of their money makers. And then that gives them the freedom to take the time to work on a Madeira or a Brazil that's coming out or something like that. So, I mean, if you're going to as your livelihood pump out medium to heavy games, I just don't see where you would have the time to develop them properly.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong there, but
let's compare this to painting, like to actual like art. Are you gonna live, Trent?
Yes.
Well, let's compare it to art and here's why. Most of the people that go to college and get like some sort of an art degree or spend their life working in a capacity where they are, like as an artist of sorts, what type of art are they really making money off of? Like let's even just look inside board games. Board games themselves. How many board game artists are making, like the sort of exploring the depths of the art form type of art? They're not able to like really get to asking questions. Like that's reserved, like the game itself takes a back seat while or I shouldn't say the game itself, the art itself takes a back seat to representing what's the real, what's the real exploration of a board game, which is the actual gameplay, right? Gameplay is first, but it has art. But the art in a board game is very rarely going to be super expressive or really explore like, the question of what is art. The types of installations you'd see in like the MoMA, the modern, the Museum of Modern Art. You're not going to see that type of stuff in a board game. If you did, it would make people go, "What is this?" And they wouldn't even know how to approach the game, because there are certain things that game has to be like mass market art, pop art, just like actually having an artist that does really quick little drawings that go all over the place. That's your person who's putting like, food on the table. And it's not really, the amount of artists that are able to like actually explore the question of what is art, what is the human experience, like the types of things where you read the document in the, you read like the description of what the artwork is in the Museum of Modern Art, and you're like, holy crap! Like I understand how they're trying to synthesize all these different like pushes in their experience and what they observe, and then put that together with this artistic medium that they've decided to choose. Like that's really cool. And I think, Trent, that what you're getting at is that like Martin Wallace is trying to make these sorts of like Museum of Modern Art like pieces and then throw them on to like the tabloid stand or something, like like put this on a greeting card. How about that? Put that type of stuff on a greeting card, and it's just like there's something there that's not quite able to fully communicate what he's really trying to do. Does that comparison bear any resemblance to what you mean?
I think so. I had to step out for just a moment there, so I kind of missed part of your point, but I think so.
Trying to make a Museum of Modern Art installation fit into a greeting card.
Well, it's kind of the overlap, really, of what you're getting at of quality versus quantity, right? I mean, that's kind of where you're going with that is you can either spend a whole long time on a few designs, make sure they're super, super good, or you can put out a whole lot of designs.
I think that he's a designer.
Difficult.
Yeah, I think he's a designer and not a developer. And I think more and more like that's, especially within heavy games, that's what you see being, that's what you see people being. You don't see the heavy games that are that well developed. Like, for example, Gaia Project, right? There's a game that was designed from the ground up, and even Terra Mystica, which came before it, there's a heavy game that was designed from the ground up with development at its core. It was like, we've got the core of a good idea. Now let's develop it to make sure it doesn't have any of these issues, right? And that happened prior to it being released, and it still had all these different things people complained about, which they then fixed in Gaia Project. I just think that, like, Martin Wallace's designs, he probably gets to that point, that sort of like writer's block point where he acknowledges that there's certain issues, but doesn't find any way around them while still conserving his thesis and point.
Well, I do know that one of the big issue that finding dedicated playtesters is a very difficult thing to do. Right. It's really hard to find people who want a group that's going to playtest your game before publishing. And in defense of A Few Acres of Snow, the Halifax hammer, I've tried pulling it off, and it is a very difficult thing to do. It's very conditional. And it's not for lack of trying, because I played the crap out of A Few Acres of Snow. And I think I pulled off the Halifax hammer once. And it's difficult to do. But getting people to play test your game is not easy. I do it every now and then for GMT, and it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Well, and there is I listen to the Ludology podcast a lot, and they talk about, one of their biggest topics there is game design, and how a game is never truly finished. A designer needs to know when do I have to quit, i.e. at what point am I just spinning my wheels and over designing this game. And it could be maybe Martin Wallace is not the best judge of that, because I think some people are better than that at others. That might be part of it too, is in his mind, and it may not even be, once again, assuming best intention, not malicious or anything, he honestly looks at it and goes, yeah, I think this is ready for publication, where maybe it's a situation where just another set of eyes needed to be on it to go, yeah, no, maybe not. But
maybe it tells the story that he set out to tell, and the fact that the game is broken is history is broken, right? Does that work? That's simulationist value wise.
Yeah, but I don't know. Possibly, but I think it's, I don't know. I think probably it's an issue of if you have to put out a lot, and partially it's just, maybe he just does need more of a developer. Everybody has their strong skill set in what they're good at. So for me, I guess the only analogy I got for this is, me in teaching. I'm not good at innovation. It's hard for me to look at a content standard and develop a lesson for that just out of the blue. But what I'm really good at is refinement. So if I know I have to teach something about motion, if I can find a lesson about teaching motion, a lab or something like that, and it's not a very good one, my skill set is I can take one that's not very good and make it really good. Mm-hmm. But just pulling something out of the ether for me, no, it's not something I do very well at all. And so, when people are talking about everybody has a game they want to design. No, I do not have that. I have nothing. And this is why, I could never take science and do research, because I can't pull that idea. What is something somebody has never investigated? I have no idea. I can't pull that out of non-existence. So, but that could be it. Everybody has skill sets that they're better at and not better at. And that is one of the reasons I think Martin Wallace ultimately got rid of Tree Frog Games, was he was realizing that he wasn't that great on the business end of things and didn't want to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I look at his recent designs, MOA is a shorter game by him, right? And I feel like that, in a way, is it's maybe more forgivable to have a game system that doesn't quite have a final act, which is almost what my complaint about MOA is.
That's what I complain too. It just felt kind of ended.
Yeah, it's missing a final act that you're working towards. Yeah. It has this weird sort of inconsistency between this first half of the game when you set everything up, and then the second half of the game when you try to make lemons out of lemonade, or try to make lemons out of lemonade. Yeah, try doing that sometime.
Well, they can unboil eggs now.
It has to be better than Doctor Who, the card game. It has to be.
That's a Martin Wallace game.
That
too.
was my eye-opening Martin Wallace moment. I'm like, okay. But there are games I love of his. I love Automobile. Automobile is fantastic. Struggle of Empires. That's a really good game. That plays up to 7 really well. What else do I have of his? PI. My wife loves PI. It's a great deduction game. I've always said a Martin Wallace game is always an interesting game to play. I loved London until Trent pointed out that first edition. You just gotta go for those cards, and I know I have a copy of London second edition to see if they fix that.
Yeah, the first edition omnibus was ridiculous.
It was as soon as you got the other one, boom, done. Check what other, but there are some really good Wallace games out there, but like Via Nebula, what? Like, okay, it's pretty, but I've got Steam, or that's essentially what that was. So yeah, Martin Wallace has become quite a mixed bag, but man, there are some games of his I absolutely adore, and some games of his I think are just absolutely underrated that not enough people played.
Well, isn't that kind of like, I don't really want to go in depth in another designer at the time frame we're getting at, but that's kind of the way I even feel about Knizia. It's like when they're on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that game
Tigris and Euphrates, oh my goodness, that is amazing. But then you get like some Game of Thrones pyramid color game. Like,
it just doesn't work.
Or Poison. Right, Joe?
Yeah, this is my favorite game.
I just recently played 13. Hands in the Sea, which is I would rather play over a few acres of snow at this point, because it does a lot more, and I think it's a better game. But there's always something about a Wallace game that you're like, this is pretty neat. But
I feel like I'm always I'm so frequently on this side that I'm like, I'm not saying this game is perfect.
Yeah.
This is really different. Like there's nothing out there that like A Study in Emerald did hidden roles, semi-cooperative hidden roles. And I'm not saying that they work perfectly well, but these are all it did auctioning off a deck builder where you auction simultaneously all the cards that are on display. There's just so many things that are going on in this game. It's got
a Cthulhu theme on top of it. It's just like this crazy.
It's got Cthulhu on top of anarchy, on top of you're assassinating people. There's whoa, this is this weird this should be a colossal train wreck.
Yeah,
not. So that's what's really cool. And it was mentioned here, Luke, you are so right. Automobile gets very much overlooked, and it is an excellent game by Martin Wallace that involves a lot of the things that are really entertaining about brass, but it applies them to the automobile industry of the sort of classic age of back when there was all sorts of different type, the 30s through the 50s, when there's just this huge explosion in the automobile industry. And it is a really interesting exploration that does have the legs that keep people playing it to this day.
I love that game. I mean, there's nothing quite like going, I'm going to make all these cars and whoops, this isn't going to go well.
Yeah, but it's got incomplete information as to how much cards are going to be available of different types at the end of the game, and it can frustrate people. I've got all these cards.
But it's good. But it's just it's weird. Lately, Martin has just been and I think I wouldn't agree with Andy on this one. I think it's a good thing that Tree Fog went away, so that he's giving these designs to other people to here's this design, you can publish it. Then with Lincoln, that should have been on the publisher to catch some of that stuff, right? Not just go, we could just, it's Martin Wallace, so slap his name on it, give it a design, just throw it up on Kickstarter. Oh my. So I'm thinking, what was that last Tree Frog game he did? That Fistful of Stars or Handful of...
Yeah, that was supposed to be the final refinement of a few acres of snow or whatever.
But he sold that system to Fantasy Flight. And I am very curious to see what they might do with that. Get some play testers on it and some design and just tweaking that thing. That'd be pretty interesting.
Retheme it to Star Wars.
Star Wars or Twilight Imperium or something.
I'm impressed that Fantasy Flight actually bought that thing. They didn't just, steal and then pretend like they didn't steal, because that seems like it could have been a pretty easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So, well, that's our designer showcase. So for a first episode, I think we explored a lot of different corners there, guys. And I think we're ready now to go into hype before this turns into a new day here. And my brother's birthday. My little brother's birthday is coming up in 28 minutes here in Central Time Zone. He's born on June 1st. So anyway, happy birthday to him coming up here. And let's go ahead and start with, I'll get my hype out of the way, because it's not actually a hype of a game. It's a hype of an experience that I'm really looking forward to. Most of our East Coast listeners, with the exception of the real hardcore, super mega high level, whatever achievement level supporters of the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly are all in bed. But anyway, I'm going to be headed out to the East Coast to visit some of y'all that are going to be at World Board Gaming Championships. That's called the WBC. It's a convention that's held in Pittsburgh, or around Pittsburgh. But it is different than most other board gaming conventions because it really is themed around tournaments that are to determine who's the best at whatever game. That's not really my style, so to say. So, but a lot of the individuals that are going to be present there, it is also like just a good gaming time to be had by all. So if you're not in your tournaments, you're also going to be, playing lots of games and just playing the types of, fun, casual gaming experiences you'd find at other conventions. And that's really what I'm looking forward to. I still plan on entering at least a tournament or two. Not because I plan on doing well at all, but just kind of more as from a journalist standpoint. Just to be able to say what it was like. Maybe I'll end up writing the diplomacy article. You remember the journalist who infiltrated the diplomacy and then wrote
Joe's joining the Time of Crisis tournaments.
The dice! The barbarians! The dice! The barbarians!
No, he will join the Liar's Dice tournament and be the first one out as they all sing "Hey, hey, goodbye."
Let's toast to all our differences. All right. So yeah, I'm really pumped, and Carmen, I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you, and there's going to be things you won't be able to unlive. WBC 2018, here I come. And now, for hyping the first discussion of train games on this podcast, I guess Age of Steam was mentioned in passing, but anyway, nothing quite at the level that you're used to hearing on The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. Andy, of course, fulfilling that role.
Yeah, so I'm going to hype, and I really don't know too much about this yet, but I thought I would highlight it because it's a designer that I talked to on Twitter a lot, and I met at HeavyCon a couple of years ago. But it's a game called Penny Rails, and so Penny Rails is going to be coming out from Button Shy Games, which if you've ever seen them, they do these kind of micro wallet games. Is kind of their specialty. So I got Pentacork from them, which I talked about quite a while ago. But Travis from the Low Player Count podcast had designed a game that was in their competition called Penny Rails. So it's something like, I don't know, I don't remember the number of cards, like 8 or 18 cards or something you get to make a game. And so he made kind of a train game-esque, micro game is what it is, using like spare change and like these small amount of cards. The description says there's shares and stuff in it, which may be or not. I'm not quite sure about it. But I want to hype it because it sounds interesting. It probably will be very inexpensive, knowing Button Shy, so it might be something I pick up. And like I said, I talked to Travis a lot, and I like it. I want to give him some kudos for that. So that's Penny Rails coming out from Button Shy Games. And I'm not quite sure when, but I know it's kind of being worked on right now. It was really funny because Travis told the story that he basically remembers he had submitted it to Button Shy, and he basically woke up one morning, logged on to BGG, and all of a sudden he had like the game designer tag under his name. And he was like, what? And then like he opened his email and Button Shy's like, yeah, we're doing Penny Rails.
Huh.
And he was just like, what? Like,
Okay.
just out of the blue. I'm a game designer now, apparently.
Nice.
And no, Travis is just a great guy, and I know he's had a hard year, and it's cool that he got a design that's going to be published. So I wanted to give him some personal kudos for that. And I
Yeah,
am
for
interested
sure,
in
man.
it.
High five, right? Fist bump. And it's a train game, so Andy automatically loves it.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's now hear from TC, who's got a game coming in, finally shipping.
Yeah, I'm going to change this up a bit because I got to tell a short story. So I'm really excited to get Fort Sumter, right? I'm like, yeah, it's coming in. People have already got their copies. I'm excited for it. And then I made a mistake. I went and I saw what else made that P500 cut. And I saw there was a game called Cataclysm, A Second World War. And I started reading about it. And I started liking what I was seeing. And I read more. Then I made a phone call. I'm like, yeah, can you pack that with Fort Sumter? Even though it's going to delay me getting it like a week, because I really want that. So I put myself in kind of a pickle. But guys, if you haven't looked at Cataclysm, A Second World War, take a look at it. It looks really interesting. Really intriguing take on the Second World War that I have not seen before. So there's two hype. There you go. I gave you a twofer. Bam, bam. There you go.
I'm looking at Cataclysm. It's in my hand.
Oh.
See this. The same thing happened with Triumph and Tragedy. I want Churchill, but Triumph and can you delay me getting Churchill so you can put Triumph and Tragedy in there? You think I would learn? No, I don't learn.
You'd think.
Yeah, you'd think.
All right, and now ending it off on a note that could have been done by either TC or Trent. Trent,
Yeah,
the newest.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about L5R, mostly just to get TC's goat.
my Scorpion clan!
Yeah. Fantasy Flight announced their second clan pack, and for some reason, unbeknownst to anyone on Earth, the strongest clan in the game is getting a bunch of extra cards.
Yeah.
I don't really know why they chose to do the best clan in the game now, but
Twitter world went bananas. Like, why are you giving the most powerful clan? Because I said, because you nerfed my deck. That's why.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what that's all about, but I guess we'll see it. It looks to me like they're just trying to take the clan in a different direction. Yeah. I don't think there's going to be anything to add to what Scorpion does well now. It's just they're going to get something completely different to do.
Yeah. And you add that to the next cycle coming up, which is going to be 6 and 6.
Yeah.
I'm going to be very broke.
There's a lot of cards coming between July and October. A lot. Yeah.
So me and Trent are going to be talking about a lot, so be prepared.
No, you guys never talk about L5R. Well, coming up here, I'm going to be actually learning how to play it, so I'll be able to understand a lot more. Trent has offered to teach me.
Play Unicorn.
Are you talking to me or Joe?
Joe. I want Joe to play Unicorn.
Okay.
Yeah. I want pictures.
Trent, I have one request. I'd rather not play Unicorn.
Yeah. You remember how, like, at the very beginning of Game of Thrones, when Night's Watch was, like, just unplayable? That's Unicorn. That's Unicorn.
Well, thanks, TC.
You're welcome. I just want the best experience for you I could possibly get.
Such a wonderful, all the love. Yeah. So much to go around.
Playing Unicorn falls in the same category as me telling Joe, yeah, merchants would be good in an Infamous Traffic.
I actually still want to go back to that game. You know what? We're getting off on tangents here, and but I like that comparison.
It's already almost midnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You better call it.
We're gonna call this one. Yeah, we're calling it down. It's a what is it? A technical knockout for this episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. And we'll catch you next week on the next episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly.
Night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.